Chapter 51. From the looks of it, Lips had clearly been waiting there for a while. First of all, congratulations to all candidates for passing the third phase of the exam. I am Lips, your examiner for Phase 3. Now, I'd like to ask you to board this airship immediately, he said, gesturing to the vessel slowly approaching from behind him. Huh? An airship? Shouldn't we be drawing number plates and heading to the next island for the fourth test? Ush blinked, confused. Still puzzled, he followed the other candidates aboard the airship. Even after sitting down, he hadn't yet processed what was happening. Wait, what's going on? The plot changed too fast. What happened to the fourth test? Did it just vanish? Ush sat there, stunned for a moment, then slowly adjusted his mindset. There was nothing he could say now. It wasn't like complaining would change anything, the situation was already set. The plot changed, so I just have to keep moving forward. As long as he had the strength, none of the other details mattered. Any challenge could be dealt with. That confidence came from within. He'd mentally prepared for this a long time ago. He just didn't expect the divergence to be this drastic. But then again, he'd never watched the 1999 version of Hunter x Hunter. Who could he blame but himself? Setting his thoughts aside, Ush moved to the window and looked out over the sea. The ocean shimmered in the sunlight, its surface glittering. The sight helped ease his mood. As the airship continued its flight, the candidates soon noticed something unusual, a moon-shaped island resting out in the middle of the sea. While others merely took in the sight, Ush observed in far more detail. He noticed something just off the shore, dozens of shipwrecks. What the hell? Ush murmured, eyes narrowing. He leaned closer, focusing intently. As he examined more carefully, he realized there were treasures, scattered among the wreckage beneath the waves. His eyes lit up. My God! If there's one thing my family's always lacked, it's money. And now, a jackpot just shows up right in front of me? Looks like this plot change might not be so bad after all. He grinned to himself, speaking in a hushed voice no one else could hear. Clearly, Ush had just stumbled onto something valuable, and he was already making mental plans. He memorized the positions of the shipwrecks and began constructing a mental map to track the treasure locations. After all, he was still in the middle of the Hunter exam, he couldn't exactly dive down and loot everything now. But later? After the exam? He could come back and scoop it all up. Even though he couldn't take anything immediately, the thought still made him happy. He smiled quietly to himself, then quickly composed his expression, masking his excitement. Soon, the airship began its descent. To Ush's surprise, they didn't land on a mountainous area or some exotic terrain. They landed on the tarmac of a massive ship. Aside from the clean landing area, the ship's deck looked meticulously maintained, much more than expected. As Ush and the others disembarked, they were greeted by an elderly couple. Despite their age, both looked strong and energetic. The candidates glanced at one another, wondering, are these two the examiners for the fourth phase? Ush, however, didn't think so. He didn't sense any nen from them. Which meant they definitely weren't Hunters. And as far as he knew, the fourth phase examiner should still be Lips. Candidates, you've worked hard. Welcome to our hotel, the old couple said with polite bows. Ush paused for a second, then it clicked. Ah, this must be a resting arrangement from the Hunter Association. Still, something didn't sit right with him. If it involved the Hunter Association, it wouldn't be that simple. There had to be some ulterior motive. Why here, specifically? If it was just for rest, they could have done that on the airship. Gone. Don't tell me this whole ship is owned by the Hunter Association? If that was true, then even if he found treasure, he'd probably have to pay for it just to take it away. With that realization, Ush's fantasy of getting rich quick burst like a bubble. Ugh. Figures. The association's assets really are insane. And in a world where people had strange and powerful nen abilities, Ush had no intention of picking a fight with the Hunter Association. So, Yeah, forget about stealing any treasure here. For all he knew, there was a hunter with a Hatsu ability that could scan past events or track people over long distances. And to risk that over a few gold coins? No thanks. The risk-to-reward ratio was terrible. After re-evaluating his options, Ush sighed and gave up on treasure hunting altogether. We are the owners of the only inn on this island. My name is Bana, and this is my husband, Gina, the old woman said kindly. Ush, hearing that, nearly rolled his eyes. Gone. With names like that, you expect me to believe this isn't fake? Please. Chapter 52. Ush silently complained in his heart, though his face remained neutral. Without knowing the full plot, he figured it was best to keep quiet for now. Besides, there would be plenty of candidates rushing ahead to play the role of pioneer. His involvement wouldn't be necessary, yet. So you're saying this is a hotel? Hanzo asked, stepping forward and addressing the elderly couple directly. Yes, the old man, Gina, replied with a warm smile. This ship was remodeled and cleaned by us. It now serves as a hotel where you can rest. Seriously? Two old people personally remodeled a derelict ship into a fully functioning hotel, and are running it all on their own? Come on. Who are you trying to fool? If they were non-users, maybe Ush could believe it. But they were just an ordinary elderly couple. Ush nearly broke into a twitch. The corners of his mouth visibly tightened. Maybe they hired workers to do the renovations, he thought, trying to reason. But then he immediately dismissed the idea. If they had the resources to do all that, wouldn't it have made more sense to open a hotel in a proper city? What kind of guest is going to come all the way out to the middle of the ocean? If not for the Hunter Association's airship, Ush doubted this place would see any business. This hotel once had the honor of hosting the King of Nibra, and many other famous people have stayed here. Our hotel is known as the Palace of Baya on the Sea, said Bana, her expression full of pride. Ush silently rolled his eyes again. If this place was truly that important, and it really was being run by just two old people, at least 10 different powerful organizations would have already taken it over by force. The only reason it hadn't been looted was likely because the forces backing this place were among the strongest in the world. Otherwise, who would give up such a prize so easily? Enough talk, Hanzo interrupted, stepping forward again with a stern look. I think you two are examiners for the next phase of the Hunter exam. Gina and Bana looked at each other. Then Bana smiled softly and replied, You're right. She turned toward the group and continued, Let me now deliver a message from the Hunter Association. Candidates, you've all worked hard to pass the third test. The fourth test will begin in 3 days. Until then, you are invited to rest and recover. She spoke with a gentle, reassuring tone. Ush carefully listened, but heard no signs of deception in her words. Her heartbeat remained steady, with no indication of lying. Still, he didn't trust this so-called 3-day break. It didn't make sense. Giving everyone an equal break was unfair to the candidates who finished early. There had to be something more behind this. Some kind of hidden trial or difficulty waiting in the shadows. Rest. Awesome, I was getting worn out. Man, finally a break. 3 days off? Sounds like heaven. He. If I use these 3 days wisely, the newbies will fall behind. Alright. I'm gonna find a room, take a shower, and just chill. The other candidates didn't think twice. They were just happy to hear the word rest, and started heading toward the ship's cabins to claim their rooms. Ush said nothing. He still sensed something fishy, but if there was a bed involved. To be honest, he was more than satisfied. And then someone mentioned bathing, that reminded him, he hadn't taken a shower in days. He sniffed himself gently. Didn't smell too bad. But that didn't mean he wasn't reeking. It was probably just that his nose had gotten used to his own stench. If Gina or Bana got close enough, they'd probably pass out. Everyone, please wait. The elderly couple called out just as the candidates were about to enter the cabins. The group stopped, turning back with puzzled expressions. "We do have one condition," Gina said solemnly. "In order to stay here, each of you must pay a 10 million jenny deposit." 10 million? Leorio practically exploded. "If I had 10 million, do you think I'd let my friends suffer?" "Wait, we have to pay?" Gon asked, clearly confused. He was just a kid, and had only left home with a bit of pocket money. 10 million jenny? That was daylight robbery. Ush narrowed his eyes. Something about this didn't add up. "And that's just the deposit," Gina continued calmly. "With that much money, you could stay at a 6-star hotel for half a year," someone shouted in disbelief. "We're just kids. Who even has that kind of cash?" Gon cried out. Leorio stepped forward, frustrated. "Exactly. We're not royalty or nobility." Then it clicked. Ush suddenly realized what was going on. He'd been thrown off by the shock of the 10 million number. But now it made sense. This was part of the Hunter exam. There was no way the association expected every candidate to have that kind of money. The cost was intentional. A trial. Meaning, while money could be used to pay, it wasn't the only currency accepted. There had to be another method. And if there was, Ush could already guess what it was. He turned his gaze toward the sea, toward the treasure-filled wrecks he had seen earlier. That's it. The treasure under the sea was the true price of the hotel. That's why the wreckage hadn't been cleared out, and why the treasures weren't buried in silt. They were meant to be retrieved. They were planted bait. Candidates weren't supposed to pay with money, they were meant to go dive for treasure. Now it all makes sense, Ush thought, his eyes narrowing. Chapter 53. Thinking about what kind of test Gina and Bana might introduce next, Ush felt a bit more relaxed. When it came to these unknown timelines, he was pretty much powerless, but at least his brain was working fine. With nothing to worry about for now, Ush casually watched Leorio argue with the old couple nearby, mildly entertained. Leorio seemed to think he could negotiate the price down. But all he got in return was a blunt. "Then there's no helping it. If you don't have money, we can't let you stay." That line made Leorio furious, and he was already planning to sleep outside on the island. "Leorio, calm down," Kurapika said, stepping in. "There's no way we can survive out there. Fresh water's going to be scarce, and under this sun, we won't last 2 days without it." "I know that," Leorio shouted. "But where am I supposed to get that kind of money? I couldn't even dream of affording it." His frustration echoed what most of the other examinees were feeling, including Ush. His own family's funds had recently taken a hit after his parents spent most of their reserves buying up property around the family hotel. Money was tight. And 10 million jenny? That was a huge sum. To put it in perspective, 10 million jenny was roughly equivalent to 200,000 yuan. More importantly, the jenny still had pretty solid purchasing power. His parents had bought those houses near the hotel for just around 100 million jenny total. So now, being asked for 10 million as a deposit just to stay somewhere? It was ridiculous. He even caught himself briefly imagining raising the prices at his own family's inn that high, but quickly laughed it off. Not happening unless there was massive inflation. At that moment, Gina added, "If you don't have the money, we do have other options." Ush perked up slightly. He'd already guessed they wouldn't really require money. Now it seemed he'd been right. The only question was, would they accept treasure as payment, like he suspected? "What kind of options?" the candidates asked. "Using local resources, of course," Gina said with a smile. "Local resources?" some echoed, confused. Gina gestured toward the surrounding sea. "This island is surrounded by shipwrecks. Among them, there are treasures, many that haven't been recovered yet. All you have to do is salvage those treasures and bring them to us. We'll appraise them." Called it, Ush thought. The Hunter Association really knows how to spin a challenge. "There's treasure?" Leorio's eyes practically turned into golden rings. "If that treasure's worth a lot," he thought, "maybe I'll just keep it, quit the exam, and live a rich life. Clearly, he wasn't the only one thinking that. Ush noticed more than a few candidates eyeing the sea with a similar glint of greed. "You're just taking advantage of our situation," one examinee shouted, clearly upset. If the Gina couple hadn't been backed by the Hunter Association, some of the more aggressive candidates might have already taken action. "To be honest, we're antique dealers by trade," Gina explained calmly. "If you bring us valuable items, we'll happily offer free accommodation in return. Of course, the quality of your room will depend on the value of what you provide." "Ah. So that's how they're playing it." Ush raised a brow. "Room level?" "Exactly," Gina replied with a smile. "The higher the value of the treasure, the better the room. And the better the food you'll be served." Gone. Ush had thought he could just dig up one shiny object and secure a basic room. But now, it wasn't just about getting a place to sleep. If he didn't bring in something valuable enough, he'd be stuck with the cheap stuff, probably dry bread and stale water. And that was unacceptable. He'd already sworn off cheap rations during the third test. If he had the chance to rest in comfort, why would he settle for less? Sure, some people might choose to rough it, but Ush wasn't one of them. If it meant better food and a proper bed, he'd gladly put in the effort. Only issue, he wasn't Kurapika, he didn't have a ton of obscure knowledge about antiques or historical artifacts. He couldn't tell a valuable item from junk at a glance. But that didn't matter. All he had to do was grab more of it. With that in mind, Ush got moving. He picked a random wrecked boat nearby and jumped onto it. His eyes paused for 3 seconds on a familiar treasure he'd already marked earlier. Then he reached out with his right hand. Whoosh! In the next second, a gleaming, gold and gem-encrusted item appeared in his grasp. Judging by the shine, this has to be worth at least 100 million, Ush muttered, nodding in satisfaction. Carrying the treasure, he returned to the deck of the massive ship, under the stunned gazes of the candidates and staff alike. Everyone else had just started looking. Ush was already back with loot in hand. He walked calmly toward Gina and set the treasure on the table in front of her. "So?" he asked. "What kind of room can I get with this?" "Already?" Gina exclaimed in surprise. She leaned in, inspecting the treasure closely. A moment later, she straightened up and said with a shake of her head. "It's only worth about 10 million." Chapter 54. "It's only worth 10 million? With all these gems, you're telling me it's only worth 10 million? Ush pointed at the treasure on the table, staring at Gina in disbelief. Gina, unfazed by Ush's reaction, calmly pointed to the gemstones on the treasure and shook her head. "Yes. Right now, it's only worth 10 million. Many of the gems are scratched or damaged, which significantly lowers their value. If it had been preserved in perfect condition, this treasure could have easily fetched hundreds of millions of Jenny. But as it stands, I can only give you a second-class room." She pushed a room key across the table. Ush didn't take it. "Forget it. I'll try again." He turned and left, clearly dissatisfied. Gina and Bana exchanged a quiet glance, then returned to their calm, composed demeanor, waiting patiently for more candidates to bring in treasures. Seeing that Ush didn't manage to score a high-tier room, the other candidates jumped into action, eager to start treasure hunting themselves. But no matter how extensive their knowledge or how skilled they were never going to beat Ush when it came to speed. While they had to dive into the sea or scavenge through sunken ships, Ush just needed to reach out. Sure enough, only a few minutes later, Ush returned to the table, once again dropping a treasure in front of Gina under the astonished gazes of the other candidates. "How is he finding this stuff so fast?" "Now what?" Ush asked, waiting for her appraisal. Gina examined the second treasure carefully and was genuinely surprised. This one was far more intact than the previous piece. "This is worth about 300 million. That qualifies you for a personal deluxe room." She handed him the key with a smile. Ush picked it up with satisfaction. No longer paying attention to the others still scrambling around the beach and sea, he turned and walked confidently toward the cabin. Quick! Find the treasure! The remaining candidates shouted, now fully in a frenzy. Ush didn't care what was happening outside. He had reached his room. The floor was laid with smooth wooden panels, the walls enclosed with elegant curtains. Before the lights were on, the room was dim, like dusk. Click. Ush flipped on the lights, and the room instantly brightened. Pink. Everywhere. The entire room was glowing in an almost painfully vibrant pink hue. Phew. The room itself was excellent, but the color scheme made Ush nearly choke. He stood outside the doorway for several minutes, clearly conflicted. It wasn't anything serious, but this overwhelming Barbie pink aesthetic? He was genuinely concerned that prolonged exposure might corrupt his soul. Nope. I'm changing rooms, he muttered. He closed the door and walked straight back to the front desk. Tap. He slapped the key down on the table in front of Gina. I'd like to change rooms, he said, completely serious. Gina looked a bit troubled. I'm sorry, but we don't offer room exchanges. However, you're free to find another candidate willing to switch with you. Ush's forehead twitched. What kind of hotel doesn't allow room swaps? Then it hit him, this wasn't a real hotel. This was a Hunter exam trial. Of course things wouldn't be that easy. There had to be a catch. With a heavy sigh, Ush picked the key back up and stepped aside. He couldn't trade with the staff, so his only option was to swap with another candidate. But Ush wasn't about to downgrade to a lower-tier room. If he was going to swap, it would have to be for another deluxe room. He watched for a while, scanning the candidates who were leaving with second-class keys. His face twisted in subtle disdain. Especially those who tried to exchange their lower-tier key for his, he refused them all without hesitation. Then it got worse. As more and more people left with second-class keys, Ush realized something alarming. No one else got a deluxe room. Everyone was accepting whatever room they were offered, no complaints, no standards. Gone. Is anyone going to get another deluxe room? Ush watched the shrinking crowd with a sense of dread. Oh no. Don't tell me I'm really going to be stuck in that awful Barbie nightmare for 3 whole days. He stared at the sky, feeling emotionally drained. Then, just when he was ready to give up, Gina spoke again. There's another personal deluxe room, she said. Ush turned his head instantly. On the table, Gina placed another key. The treasure that had earned it? A simple box of seashells. Gone. Even something like that qualifies for a deluxe room? If he'd known, he would have offered something like that right from the start. Sloppy. Suppressing his irritation, Ush composed himself, then approached Leorio, who had just been awarded that room. Hey, brother, Ush greeted him with a charming smile. Looks like we both got deluxe rooms. But the one I got, the aesthetic isn't really my vibe. I think yours would suit me better. He grinned, hand extended. So how about it? Want to trade? Chapter 55. Change rooms? You stood here all this time just to ask me to change rooms? Leorio looked at Ush in surprise. No way around it, that room really doesn't suit me, Ush said earnestly. Leorio eyed him suspiciously. He didn't believe Ush for a second. They weren't even close. Why would he trust Ush the way he trusted Gon and Kurapika? Forget it. All the rooms are luxurious anyway, and mine's pretty decent. Leorio rejected Ush's offer. Ush sighed in disappointment. Watching Leorio head toward his room, Ush hesitated for a moment, then turned to look at the remaining candidates. Eventually, he followed Leorio, curious to see what Leorio's room looked like and how it differed from his own. What are you doing here? Even if you're here, I'm still not switching rooms with you, Leorio said warily. Now he was even more convinced that something was wrong with Ush's room. Why else would he be so persistent about switching? I just want to see what your room looks like, that's all, Ush said calmly, waving his hand to reassure him. Seeing that Ush didn't seem to be lying, Leorio decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, for now. Soon, they arrived at Leorio's so-called luxury suite. But the moment Ush laid eyes on it, something felt off. The room seemed warmer than the rest of the building. Also, the door to Leorio's room was completely different from the door to Ush's suite. This one looked old and shabby, nothing like a personal luxury room at all. Ush started to get a suspicion, though he wasn't entirely sure yet. Click. Leorio opened the door. Whoosh. A wave of heat blasted them in the face. Leorio immediately started sweating. Ush didn't feel much. After all, his body was still protected by his Nen aura, but that didn't stop him from observing. Just standing at the door for a bit had Leorio drenched in sweat. It was obvious that there was something weird going on with this room. Besides, the layout and atmosphere here were drastically different from Ush's overly pink, Barbie-themed nightmare of a room. Was this really a deluxe room? Ush didn't think so. Honestly, it might even be worse than the pink horror show he had. Let's switch rooms, Leorio said seriously. No thanks, I think my room's actually pretty good, Ush replied without hesitation, turning down Leorio's offer. Leorio tried to persuade him. Come on, didn't you just say you wanted to switch? Yeah, and you turned me down, Ush shrugged helplessly. Anyway, I've got things to do, so I'll be going. While there was still time, Ush wanted to see if anyone else had landed an actual luxury suite. A real one. Not the fake personal luxury mess Leorio had. Watching Ush walk away, Leorio's expression turned bitter. He realized that if he had to spend 3 days in that room, he might be better off sleeping outside. At least it would be cooler. This room was so hot it was unbearable. Outside, all you had to worry about was water. In here, your sweat evaporated the second it came out. Compared to that, the heat inside was downright terrifying. Without serious strength, staying in that room was basically torture. Even if you did have strength, it was far from comfortable. Leorio really wanted to switch rooms. Now there were 2 people trying to swap rooms. But Ush was puzzled. Out of all the candidates present, not a single one besides Leorio had a personal room. Which meant if he wanted to trade, he'd have to settle for a second-class room. During his search, he ran into some of the other candidates, like Tumpa, also trying to change rooms. But their roommates weren't exactly friendly types. There was the snake charmer, the creepy-eyed Jureta, and Hisoka. In short, not the kind of people you'd want to bunk with. After checking out the second-class rooms, Ush lost interest in changing. Although those rooms had their own appeal, especially the food, they didn't feel worth the trouble. In the end, Ush decided not to switch after all. With that in mind, he returned to his original luxury suite, aka the Death by Barbie room. Opening the door and seeing the sea of pink once again, he took a few deep breaths. Then, gritting his teeth, he stepped inside. First thing he did was rip open all the pink curtains covering the walls. He hoped the walls were white underneath, maybe even made of steel. But what greeted him made his heart sink, still pink. More Death Barbie pink. And under the lighting, everything sparkled with an obnoxious glitter. Ultra girly. Ush shivered, goosebumps all over. It was beyond unsettling. Mouth twitching, he approached the only pink wardrobe in the room with a sliver of hope. Maybe he could find a blanket, any color would do, as long as it wasn't that cursed pink. And maybe his will finally bent reality a little, because he actually found a set of bedsheets that weren't Barbie pink. Forget it. Red is fine. Way better than Death Barbie pink. If he kept the lights off at night, stayed under the red blanket, and avoided the room as much as possible during the day, maybe, just maybe, he could survive 3 days here. With that gritty determination, Ush changed the bedding with a grim expression. With the red quilt in place, it didn't feel quite as unbearable. Well, it is a luxury suite, I'll give it that, he muttered. The bed's just like one of those high-end suites back in Yorknew's 6-star hotels. Finally, something to feel a bit good about. And that would have to be enough, for now. Chapter 56. After taking a bath, Ush left the room, The kind of room you could sleep in but definitely couldn't stay in for long. He headed out to the deck, found a lounge chair, and sat down. Then, quietly gazing at the sky, he let his aura flow gently across the surface of his body. From time to time, strange shapes flickered into view. Time passed slowly. Before long, it was noon. "Dear guests, please return to your rooms. We've prepared lunch for you, please enjoy it to your heart's content." Banna's voice echoed over the intercom. Soon after, the examinees heard knocks at their doors. When they opened them, they found either Gina or Banna standing outside with trays of food. Some examinees were happy. Others, not so much. The lowest tier rooms received only bread and water. The second-class rooms got a few extra slices of ham. This kind of disparity made some candidates seethe with frustration, but there was nothing they could do except accept it. As for Ush, when he heard the announcement, he got up and walked back to his room. He didn't go inside, he simply waited at the door. Soon enough, he saw Gina approaching, pushing a dining cart. "Sir, please step into your room. I'll bring your food in," Gina said with a pleasant smile. "No need. Just give it to me here," Ush said quickly, cutting her off. "No way am I letting her wheel food into the Barbie nightmare room. I'll lose my appetite before I take a bite." Thankfully, Gina didn't insist. She handed the dining cart over to Ush without fuss. Lifting the stainless steel lid, Ush examined the food. A steak, some rice, a plate of pasta, a dish of scallops, and a chilled drink. Ordinary meals by outside standards, maybe 3,000 jenny at most, but here, they felt like gourmet cuisine. Especially considering the other candidates were getting nothing more than bread and water, or maybe a little ham. Compared to that, Ush felt completely satisfied. Contrast really is everything. A meal he'd normally take for granted had become a luxurious treat in this miserable place. At that moment, Ush felt even more confident in his earlier decision not to trade rooms. If he had, he'd probably be gnawing on a crust of bread right now. Feeling pleased, Ush pushed the cart back out to the deck and started eating happily. This little move made the other examinees, who were choking down their dry bread and dealing with the bitterness of their situation, absolutely livid. They ground their teeth in envy. What a way to draw hate! But under their heated gazes, Ush calmly finished his lunch, picked up his cold drink, leaned back on his recliner, and stared out at the sea without a care in the world. The whole afternoon passed in this peaceful idleness, with Ush casually practicing his aura control. Soon, the sky began to darken. Dinner time again. Considering how easily he'd drawn resentment during lunch, Ush was more cautious at dinner. Although he still brought his food out to the deck, he ate much faster this time. To be fair, probably because of lunch, there were fewer people on the deck during dinner. Most had likely decided it was better not to see anything at all. Out of sight, out of mind. As long as they didn't witness it, they could pretend no one else was eating better than them. "We're all just eating bread and water. Yup, all of us." And it worked, at least for a while. Many of the candidates seemed to have calmed down. Still, wasn't there something a little pitiful about it? Boom. Just as Ush finished dinner and leaned back to gaze at the sea again, an explosion erupted. A nearby ship had caught fire. The blaze was massive, it was obvious that someone had used gasoline. The flames lit up the sky, casting a fiery red glow as dusk set in. What the hell? People are this wild now? Burning a ship in the middle of a test. Ush's attention snapped to the scene. Then he saw two familiar figures, Kurapika and Leorio, jumping out of the burning vessel. Oh, so they were the ones who started the fire? But why? Ush muttered to himself, puzzled. From what he remembered of their personalities in the original story, neither Kurapika nor Leorio seemed like the type to set a ship on fire for no reason. It just didn't add up. If it had been Hanzo, Tumpa, or someone like Bakurator, Ush wouldn't have been surprised in the slightest. But Kurapika and Leorio? That threw him. Curious, Ush's gaze sharpened. Though the ship was still far away, His aura-enhanced vision made it feel like it was right in front of him. He zoomed in on the burning ship, and overheard a conversation between Kurapika and Leorio. 10 seconds later. Oh, that explains it. So the ship belonged to Kurapika's clan. No wonder. But that raised another question. What were Kurapika's clanmates doing here? What kind of bad luck is that? Whoosh. Damn. What the hell was that? As Ush was still thinking it over, a thunderous roar rang out, making him jolt in surprise. He turned toward the upper deck, the ship's command bridge. Squinting, he spotted two more familiar figures, Gon and Killua. Oh great, the full protagonist squad is here, Ush grumbled, rubbing his ears. Of course they're all tangled up in the same event. After that, Ush lost interest. It wasn't anything major, and he didn't care about their personal drama. Let them handle their own business. Chapter 57. Time passed slowly, and before Ush knew it, the sky had turned completely dark. Since there were no lights on out on the deck, he had no choice but to return to his room. Without hesitation, he didn't even bother turning on the light. He just got into bed and went straight to sleep. Early to bed, early to rise, good for your health. Ah, finally, Ush sighed as he lay on the bed, enjoying the softness beneath him. It wasn't a hard board like before, he couldn't help but voice his relief. Soon enough, Ush drifted off to sleep. Meanwhile, the other candidates were still up, doing their own things. Most of them probably wouldn't even think about sleeping for another hour or two. But that had nothing to do with Ush, he was already out cold. Sleep always makes time fly. It feels like you just closed your eyes, and suddenly, hours have gone by. Buzz. Huh? What's that sound? Ush's eyes snapped open. Thanks to his aura abilities, even a faint sound felt like someone yelling in his ear through a megaphone. That's the sound of spinning propellers? An airship? Damn, it's starting now. Ush jolted up, tossed off his blanket, and rushed to the deck in a few quick steps. Knowing how tricky the Hunter Association could be, Ush had the foresight to sleep in his clothes. When he arrived at the deck, the other candidates were still sound asleep, he was the only one there. The airship hadn't taken off yet, but it had just started to power up. Without wasting a second, Ush dashed straight toward the airship window. On the other side of the glass, he spotted Gina and Bana. The couple looked shocked to see Ush plastered against the window. Clearly, they hadn't expected anyone to show up at this hour, much less like this. They froze in surprise, not sure how to respond. Ush, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. He raised his right hand, ready to smash the window and force his way inside. If you're taking off, you better take me with you. But then he suddenly stopped. Because Bana held up a white sign. It read, "This is a test." A test? Ush stared at Gina and Bana, stunned. They both nodded furiously. Seriously? If it's a test, why not just say so? What's with the dramatic getaway? Ush sighed, pressing a hand to his temple in exasperation. Phew. He released his grip on the airship, letting go of the small ledge he had grabbed onto. The moment he did, he dropped down, right in front of Gina and Bana's stunned faces. Thankfully, the airship had only risen about 5 meters at that point. Not too high. Ush didn't even need to use his aura abilities to land safely. Thud. Landing lightly, Ush looked up at the slowly rising airship. Thud, thud. A few seconds later, someone else arrived. Ush turned his head and saw Gon and Killua come running out, standing at the doorway, staring at the airship now hovering above them. Surprised, they walked over to Ush and stood beside him, watching the airship ascend in silence. Click. Soon, the rest of the candidates began pouring out of their rooms. They all stared up at the airship, frustration written across their faces. You didn't need to be a genius to know they were all in a pretty bad mood. Did they abandon us here? No wonder I had a bad feeling earlier, so this was it. Hey, Gon, did you see what they did? Leorio turned to Gon and Killua, hoping for answers. At his question, the other candidates turned to the two boys as well. Since Gon and Killua had arrived before the rest of them, maybe they'd seen something useful. But Gon shook his head. Nope. That response disappointed everyone, but it wasn't surprising. After all, Gon hadn't gotten there that much earlier than them. Admitting he saw more would be like saying the rest of them were slow and unalert. If anyone saw something, it's probably candidate 188, Killua said, glancing at Ush, who was still calmly watching the direction the airship had flown off in. He was standing here for quite a while before we got here. Hope flickered again in the crowd. Phew. All eyes turned to Ush. Faced with the weight of everyone's gaze, Ush remained unfazed. Still looking at the sky, he let out a heavy sigh. No need to guess, it was a test. I actually got inside the airship, and they didn't throw me out until I figured it out, Ush called out to the others. PFFT. His words drew muffled laughter from several candidates. Haha. You actually made it in, and then got kicked out? Leorio and Hanzo chuckled. Kurapika gave Leorio a look and said, Leorio, the real problem is we didn't even make it onto the airship. Eh? Leorio blinked. As funny as it was to be kicked out of a departing airship, wasn't it even funnier to not get there in time at all? At least Ush had been rejected by choice. The rest of them never even had the option. Leorio and Hanzo scratched their heads, suddenly feeling a little awkward. They both turned their eyes back to the sky. What exactly is the test? Bakurator asked Ush seriously. Ush shook his head. No idea. They didn't explain what kind of test it is. Honestly, he found the whole thing a bit of a headache. If this is part of the exam, then maybe there's some kind of clue hidden on the ship. Let's search and see if we can find anything, Kurapika suggested. Everyone nodded in agreement. This was, after all, the hunter exam, and they all wanted to become hunters. Chapter 58. Having made their decision, the candidates began changing into their clothes and joined the search for clues about the next test. Everyone was scouring the inside of the ship. Ush was no exception. However, seeing so many candidates already rummaging through the cabin, Ush decided not to join the crowd. Instead, he stayed outside and searched the exterior of the warship for any suspicious signs. But it wasn't easy. Fortunately, with his distance-enhancing ability, Ush didn't need to physically move around, he could simply observe from where he stood. Even so, after scanning the entire outer wall of the warship, he didn't find any useful clues. All he could see was that the ship had clearly fallen into disrepair, with large patches of barnacles clinging to the hull. Not surprising, after all, it was still night, and the darkness made it hard to see anything clearly. Everyone, come here. Kurapika's voice suddenly rang out from the deck. Startled, Ush walked over. There, he saw Kurapika holding a map. What's that? Ush asked, narrowing his eyes, until he saw the words written on the map, Guard Island. Of course he knew what that meant. That was where the fourth phase of the hunter exam was supposed to take place. And now, they were on Battleship Island. Clearly, this was a roundabout way to get them to head to Guard Island. So the goal's obvious now. The association wants us to make our way to Guard Island, one of the candidates said, surprised. Everyone nodded in agreement. If Ush hadn't already confirmed this was part of the test, there might have been doubt. But with confirmation in hand, no one questioned it anymore. That's right, check this out, Leorio said, walking over with a box. Everyone gathered around and saw that it was filled with compasses. That made the objective of the test even more clear. But we still don't know how far away Guard Island is, Kurapika said seriously. If we say aloud blindly, the risk is too high. That's fine, we can use this chance to measure the approximate distance between the two islands and figure out the direction, Hanzo replied, pulling out a measuring tool he had found. Now that they were prepared, there was no need to delay. The more experienced candidates began taking measurements using their own methods. Time passed slowly, and soon the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Greta, who had been silently watching Kurapika's group at work, suddenly stood and walked away. Her sudden movement drew a few glances, but no one thought much of it. Returning his focus, Ush continued helping Kurapika's group estimate the distance between the two islands. They had already determined the direction, the only thing left was figuring out how far away the island was. No good. There are too few parameters to calculate an accurate distance, Ush muttered, putting down the tool and frowning. As he spoke, Ush raised his head, pressed his fingers to his temple, and looked toward the highest part of the warship. His eyes widened slightly, and in the next instant, his vision zoomed in as though the towering conning tower was right in front of him. "What's wrong?" Kurapika and the others who were working with him noticed the change in his expression. Ush didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the conning tower, silently urging Kurapika to take a look. Unfortunately, Ush was overestimating Kurapika's eyesight. Not everyone had Ush's bug-like vision, especially when what he wanted them to see was so small. Seeing the puzzled looks on their faces, Ush sighed and said, "I think I know what this part of the test is really about." "What do you mean?" His words immediately caught everyone's attention. "I don't think we're meant to go to Guard Island. I think we're supposed to escape from Battleship Island," Ush said solemnly. The candidates were stunned. Leorio rolled his eyes and said, "Isn't that the same thing?" "There's a huge difference," Ush replied. "If we were just going to Guard Island, the difficulty wouldn't be that high, just some preparation and planning would be enough. But the way Gina and Banna fled, and the specific location they chose to leave from, combined with the barnacles I saw on the conning tower. It's obvious, they're showing us we have a limited amount of time. At most, 3 days. No, probably only 2 left now. If we don't leave the island in time, we'll be going down with it." He pointed toward the conning tower with a grim expression. "What barnacles?" Kurapika and a few others who understood what that meant followed his gaze in shock. Swish. The faster candidates immediately dashed toward the conning tower. Just a few seconds later, "There really are barnacles," someone shouted, stunned as they examined the iron wall. "Whoa, seriously?" "Yeah, the whole side of the ship is covered in them." Everyone fell silent. At that moment, Greta returned from the other side of the ship. "I just checked the water tower," she reported. "There's not much fresh water left. Enough for maybe 2 more days, at most." "Oh great, that makes it even worse. We probably only have the rest of today," Ush said, pressing his temple in frustration. To be honest, he wasn't personally worried about sinking with the island. Thanks to his weight-adjusting ability, he had preloaded enough energy before the exam to last for at least 3 months. If he made himself weigh just 1 kilogram, he could either fly or run across the sea without much difficulty. A shipwreck couldn't stop him. But there was a problem. He didn't have nearly enough food and water to make that kind of journey. Chapter 59. Need more food and water? No problem, with Ush's strength, that could be done easily. However, Ush knew he couldn't afford to take too much. Because if he did, he wouldn't be able to fly, or run across the sea. And without food or water, stranded in the vast ocean, he'd be done for in about 7 days. To make matters worse, the energy stored in his kilogram fruit ability wouldn't be fully depleted yet, meaning he'd still be hovering in the air for months before finally falling into the sea. Shh. Just thinking about it made Ush inhale sharply through his teeth. In fact, when the other candidates heard his explanation, they all gasped too. Clearly, they were spooked. "No, we don't have the whole day," Kurapika said seriously. "We only have the morning and afternoon to get a certain distance away from this island. Otherwise, we might still get caught in whatever happens." The moment those words left his mouth, the group's anxiety deepened. "But that also means Guard Island probably isn't too far from here," Ush added thoughtfully, rubbing his chin. "We might be able to reach it within a day if we sail directly." "I don't care, I'm leaving now," one of the candidates suddenly shouted, unable to wait any longer, and rushed off to find a boat. "Same here. Sorry, gotta go." One by one, the candidates began to leave in a hurry. At this point, Kurapika and Hanzo could no longer stop them. Truthfully, they themselves wanted to get off the island as soon as possible too. The problem was, the only boats available were in terrible condition. Trying to repair a large vessel in just a few hours was hopeless. And they still needed to prepare food and water. There just wasn't enough time. The danger was clear. Some of these candidates would likely head out into the ocean completely unprepared, and end up dead at sea. Unfortunately, there wasn't even a large ship available that could carry them all. The only real ship around was the battleship they were standing on. But Ush didn't believe it was possible to free the battleship from its grounding on the island within half a day. Sigh. If only I had the glint fruit or the door fruit. I could just get my supplies and go. Even without those, if I could get the flight fruit, I'd be fine. But relying only on the kilogram fruit, carrying food and water, and sprinting across the ocean on foot, that's just too much trouble. Especially if a storm hits, I'd have to abandon the supplies entirely. Maybe I could try to manifest the transformation fruit. It's just a perimecia type. But what are the odds? Ush muttered to himself, frowning. Without a large number of life forms nearby to absorb life energy, how long would the transformation fruit even last? Ush's concerns weren't without reason. His current manifestation aura level was around 2,300 points. Each manifestation required a huge amount of energy, and even with all the aura collected from measuring tools, he could only maintain a summoned fruit ability for about 4 minutes. And there was no guarantee he'd get the fruit he wanted on the first try. Maybe it'd take 5 tries. Maybe 10. His potential aura cap was just 30,000. How many attempts could he realistically afford? Even if he succeeded, the transformation fruit would consume not just aura but also drain his own mental energy, and siphon life force from his surroundings. At best, Ush figured he could maintain it for an hour. But even with an hour of flight, there was no guarantee he could reach Guard Island. And he had no intention of gambling on that. Sure, he could try absorbing energy mid-flight, but he didn't want to rely on something so uncertain. After all, it all hinged on one thing. Whether the next fruit he summoned actually was the transformation fruit. If it wasn't, then not only would he waste valuable aura and time recovering, he'd miss his chance to escape in the safest window. Worse still, he'd have to rely on his kilogram fruit, which still had 3 months of use left, and might end up using it inefficiently. And more importantly, it was January. It was winter. According to how Ush's ability worked, once he used a new miracle fruit ability, the kilogram fruit would disappear. The likely outcome? More loss than gain. So, better to be smart about it. Find a decent boat. Prepare some kind of waterproof container, leather pouches or sealed balls, for food and water. Tie it all together with a rope, then tie the other end to his wrist. That way, he wouldn't have to carry the supplies while flying, and if the boat sank, the food would still float on the water. He wouldn't lose anything. With that plan in mind, Ush didn't waste another second. He stood up, dusted off his clothes, and said, "All right then. I'm heading out too. You guys better get moving soon." With that, he nodded to Kurapika and turned to leave. "First things first, I need a better boat. Or well, anything that floats. Then I need something waterproof to seal the food, something impact-resistant," he reminded himself aloud as he walked into the cabin. He moved methodically through the interior, walking several meters at a time, checking every room he passed. Wooden blocks? Not useful. Rope? He tested it, decent strength. Useful. He kept it. Paper? Nope. Planks? At first, no. But then he paused. Actually, maybe planks could work. They might tip over, but they wouldn't sink. If he added a rope, maybe he wouldn't have to spend too much time floating in the air after all. Chapter 60. Hey! No way, he's really going to set out to sea like that? Is he insane? That's a death wish. Does he actually think tying a rope to his wrist is going to protect him from a shipwreck? That's so naive. It's weird. Based on his behavior earlier, he didn't seem this reckless. By noon, many candidates were staring in disbelief at Ush, who was now standing atop a large wooden plank at sea. Roughly 3 by 2 meters in size, the plank had a huge waterproof container tied to it, clearly filled with supplies. Both the plank and the container were secured to Ush's wrist with rope. It looked well prepared, but the candidates knew the risk was enormous. They couldn't help murmuring amongst themselves. In response to their disbelief, Ush just grinned, waved cheerfully, and then stepped onto the board. He channeled his aura into Zetsu and gave a powerful push. In the next second, the board shot forward like a speedboat. The sheer force he used was clear. So fast, someone shouted in amazement. Just like that, Ush disappeared into the distance. Seeing this, some candidates began wondering whether they should try Ush's method. And sure enough, not long after, 2 more candidates followed suit, Hisoka and Jareta. Both were experienced nen users and confident in their strength. After determining that Guard Island likely wasn't too far away, they were sure they could make it across on a plank, just like Ush. Most importantly, they believed they could survive, even if things went wrong. After seeing 3 people depart one after another, the rest of the examinees began to panic. They knew that the sooner they left, the better. After all, who could say whether there was a limited number of slots for the 4th phase? And in another hour or 2, it might already be too late to leave. By then, anyone setting out could be trapped in the stormy sea. With panic setting in, any chance of teamwork, like in the original plan to repair and sail the battleship, was gone. Even Gon and the others had long since begun repairing small boats instead of waiting. Meanwhile, Ush, already out to sea, was in good spirits. So far, the weather was calm. The wind was absent, and the air pressure was strangely low. Anyone with basic meteorological knowledge would recognize this as the calm before a storm. Realizing this, Ush was quietly thankful. Good thing I left early. If I had stayed on that island, I might have been caught in the storm. Even with my powers, I could have been in real trouble. The journey was silent and smooth. After several hours of paddling, he estimated that he'd exited the danger zone. Thanks to his early departure, there was still daylight. Finally, I can breathe a little easier, Ush muttered, deciding to take a short break. To save time, he had been using Joe to reinforce the plank, letting him row harder without breaking it. But that came at a cost. His aura was depleted, and he was exhausted. Sitting atop the wooden board, his nen made him light as a feather. As a result, his clothes and body were still dry. Opening his waterproof bag, Ush took out some of the prepared food and water. He looked back at the sea behind him while he ate. Even using his distance vision ability, he couldn't spot any of the other candidates. It was clear, they either hadn't left yet, or they were very far behind. Lunch didn't take long. After eating, Ush resealed his bag and got ready to move on. But as he reached for the oars, his eyes widened. He stared into the distance. Even though his enhanced vision was reduced by over 3 kilometers, he could still make out a faint white line, connecting the sea to the sky. It wasn't crystal clear, but Ush could guess what it was. A waterspout. Also known as a dragon sucking water or sea tornado. A waterspout is a rotating column of air and water vapor that forms over warm water. Its top connects to storm clouds, while the bottom touches the sea's surface. It spins rapidly while moving along. These vapor-filled vortexes can be just as dangerous as land-based tornadoes. Wind speeds inside can reach over 200 kilometers per hour. Even at their weakest, around 55 meters per second, they're strong enough to lift boats weighing several tons. If a person were caught inside, they'd be torn apart by wind and water pressure, or worse, suffocated by the force of the water slamming into them. However, the good news was that waterspouts don't last long. As long as they can be avoided, they're not an impossible threat. And for Ush, this one wasn't a problem. It was still far off. But for the candidates who were still on Warship Island, or hadn't yet escaped the surrounding waters, it was dangerous. Shaking his head and sighing, Ush picked up the oars and started rowing again. You entered the hunter exam, you're responsible for your own life. Whatever happens from here on out, it's on them. Row faster. We have to get out of this area before that waterspout gets close. Easy for you to say. We're paddling as hard as we can, but this wind is messing everything up. Stop whining. Put your back into it. If that thing reaches us, we're dead meat. Damn it, ah. The remaining candidates were paddling furiously, trying to outrun the looming storm. Kurapika, do you think we'll make it out in time, before the waterspout hits? Leorio asked, his voice full of worry. Chapter 61. Don't talk, just row. If we'd known there'd be a waterspout, we should have started preparing last night, Kurapika said seriously, staring straight at the white line forming in the distant sky. Gon and Killua didn't say a word. They just kept rowing with their heads down. This wasn't just traveling anymore, this was survival. If they couldn't get out of the area in time, it would be dangerous. While the candidates struggled to row for their lives, Ush, who had been paddling for another half hour, suddenly stopped. He looked up at the sky. Descending toward his location was an airship. Judging from the symbol on the side, it was the Hunter Association's airship, the same one that had departed the previous evening. Hey! So it turns out we only needed to get clear of Warship Island's waters, Ush muttered. If I knew that, I could have just flown the whole way. Would have been a lot faster than rowing. He sighed and shook his head, then calmly waited for the airship to land. Soon, Ush was picked up. Congratulations, Candidate 188, you're the first to pass this provisional test, said Liper, the examiner from the third phase, as soon as Ush stepped aboard. You guys can predict when a waterspout's going to spawn? Ush asked directly, ignoring everything else. Liper paused briefly, then smiled. No. It's just that this kind of phenomenon happens once every 10 years around Warship Island. Hearing that, Ush's earlier surprise quickly faded. He had thought they had some advanced technology for forecasting natural disasters, but no, it was just routine. Got it. So what now? Ush asked. Candidates who pass early just rest for now. You'll wait here until the others finish the temporary test, Liper replied, pointing toward the lounge area. Understood. Ush gave a wave and walked toward the rest area, finding a seat and collapsing into it. Ah. I'm beat, he muttered, yawning. Even though he'd gone to bed early the previous night, the airship's noise had woken him up not long after, and he hadn't gotten proper sleep. And rowing half the day had drained a lot of his nen. Ush wasn't made of steel, of course he was exhausted. While Ush rested, the other candidates were still out at sea, facing growing danger. As the deadly waterspout drew nearer, the candidates, especially those still near Warship Island, felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It felt like the waterspout could suck them up at any moment. In desperation, they paddled harder, some to the point of frenzy. But that didn't help everyone. One group, due to uneven rowing, ended up spinning in circles on the water. Disaster loomed ever closer. Idiot. What the hell are you doing? If we keep going like this, we're all gonna die. Just follow my lead and row when I say. Why the hell should we listen to you? Shut up, damn it. This isn't the time to argue. If you want to die, don't take us with you. It was total chaos, like a shouting match in a wet market. But in the end, under the pressure of impending death, the group managed to pull themselves together. By contrast, Gon and the others were much more organized. Under Kurapika's command, they rowed in perfect unison, their coordination allowing them to quickly distance themselves from the dangerous zone. Even though they weren't among the first to set out, their smooth teamwork helped them catch up to candidates who had left earlier. Of course, it wasn't just luck, they were truly capable. Still, no matter how hard the others paddled, None of that mattered to Ush right now. He was sound asleep, blissfully so. It wasn't until the second batch of candidates arrived that Ush finally stirred, smacking his lips as he slowly woke up. He glanced around, and sure enough, it was Hisoka and Jareta who had arrived. Seeing them meant the rest of the candidates probably weren't far behind. Since that was the case, it was no longer the best time to sleep. With a few hours to kill, Ush got up, made his way to the dining area, grabbed some food, and sat down to eat. Noticing this, Hisoka and Jareta also came over, picked up their own meals, and joined him at the table. None of them spoke. They just ate in silence. As time passed, Ush's prediction proved accurate. More and more candidates began to arrive. By nightfall, 25 candidates in total had completed the temporary test. That number was close to what Ush remembered. But this strange sense of accuracy made him pause. What's going on with this temporary test? I don't remember this part in the story. If I didn't see it in the anime, then why is it playing out so specifically now? Then a thought hit him. Wait. The Hunter x Hunter anime I watched might have been the newer version. Could there have been an older version I never saw? Even if there was, though, both anime were adapted from the same manga. The story should have been the same, right? So why are things unfolding like they're following a completely different timeline? Damn it. How much of the old version's plot don't I know about? Could the older Hunter x Hunter anime actually have a different exam arc from the new one? This realization was troubling. Looks like the only way to figure it out is to keep going and adapt as I learn more. And if I want to avoid getting tripped up by unknowns like this again, I need to get stronger. Even if strength can't solve every problem, I need the strength to survive no matter what. Only then does it not matter how much the plot has changed. Chapter 62. First of all, congratulations to all of you who completed the provisional phase of the third test. A total of 25 candidates remain, Liper announced. Now, only the fourth and final phases of the Hunter exam remain. The venue for the fourth test is Guard Island, and the airship is currently en route there. It will take approximately 5 hours to arrive. Before we land, we have a small activity to complete. Once all the candidates had gathered, Liper began speaking clearly and directly. As his words fell, some of the exhausted candidates struggled to stay alert, doing their best to focus on what he was saying. The mention of yet another test, 2 more tests, in fact, was enough to make the worn-out candidates despair. They didn't want to hear it. All they wanted was sleep. And with only 5 hours of travel time, any delay meant even less rest. But the problem was, they were already running on empty. Without enough sleep, their combat performance in the next phase would be seriously affected. Snap. Liper, aware of their exhaustion, didn't waste time. He snapped his fingers, and a staff member brought over a box. Next, you each draw a lot from this box, Liper said with a grin, gesturing behind him. Draw lots. The examinees murmured, confused. Oh? Is the plot sinking back up again? Ush's eyes lit up at the mention of drawing lots. A familiar development was always more comforting than an unknown one, even if he didn't necessarily need it. Yes. Draw lots to determine your role as hunter or prey, Liper said, his tone playful and a little ominous. The candidates were briefly stunned, then relaxed a little. Finally, they thought. A test that actually feels like it belongs in a hunter exam. Many of them had felt that the earlier phases weren't really hunter-related at all. After Liper's detailed explanation, everyone understood the process clearly. Inside the box were 25 number plates. Each candidate would draw one. The order of drawing would match the order in which they arrived on the airship. Which meant Ush would draw first. Unbothered, Ush stepped forward and reached toward the box. But just as he was about to draw, he paused and looked up. Wait, there are 25 number plates, right? That means my own number could be in here too. What happens if I draw my own plate? Ush asked. Yeah, What if I draw my own number? Leorio added loudly. The other candidates didn't speak, but all turned their eyes to Liper with the same question. You'll find out after you draw, Liper said with a mischievous smile, motioning for Ush to continue. Ush pouted slightly but didn't ask further. He reached into the box and drew a number plate. One glance, and a grin spread across his face. Jackpot. He quickly hid the plate and returned to the group, smiling to himself. The rest of the candidates were dying of curiosity, but there was no way to see which number Ush had drawn. All they could do was hope it wasn't his own. After all, the strength Ush had demonstrated during the exam so far was not to be taken lightly. Soon, all the candidates had drawn their number plates. Liper continued with the rules. The machine has already recorded the number plate each of you drew, so you're free to hide or dispose of them however you want. The number on your plate is the person you must hunt. His tone grew more animated. It was clear he was enjoying this part. The candidates' minds began to race. If you drew an easy target, you could relax a bit. But if you pulled someone strong, things just got complicated. Liper's next words only added to the tension. You need to obtain the number badge of your target. Immediately, many candidates discreetly began hiding their number badges to avoid being identified. Those who were confident in their strength didn't seem concerned at all. Liper then gave the full scoring breakdown. Your own number badge is worth 3 points. Your praise badge is also worth 3 points. Any other candidate's badge is worth 1 point. To advance to the next phase, you need a total of 6 points. If you happened to draw your own number, your badge alone is worth 6 points, so you must simply hold on to it until the test ends. With that, the rules of the fourth phase are complete. As the information sank in, the candidates were buzzing with emotion. But no amount of emotion could fight the exhaustion of those who hadn't slept yet. Since being awakened the previous night, they hadn't rested once, and they'd spent the entire day rowing. If they wanted to perform well in the next test, sleep was critical. One by one, the sleep-deprived candidates began to doze off, leaving Ush, the only one with a decent night's rest, looking unusually energetic. He simply shrugged. Then, deciding there was nothing more to gain from staying awake, Ush joined them in catching up on sleep. This wasn't the right time to practice Nen. Burning more aura and pushing his body now would only make things worse later. More importantly, Ush could sense that Hisoka's aura was growing increasingly strange. In his gut, Ush was almost certain that Hisoka would target him in the next phase. Even though he didn't plan to provoke Hisoka, it was probably a good idea to stay in top condition, just in case. Chapter 63. Soon, the airship arrived and stopped at the cliffside of Guard Island. Dear candidates, we've reached our destination. Please disembark and assemble within 5 minutes. The voice over the airship's intercom announced. The broadcast woke the remaining sleeping candidates, who opened their eyes one after another. Ush was no exception. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to shake off the last traces of sleep and adjust his mental state. Then he exited the airship with the rest of the candidates. Not gonna lie. Traveling by airship is way better than the anime's boat method, where they didn't even get a place to sleep, Ush thought with a sigh, appreciating the perks of this altered timeline. The group stepped off the airship and gathered at the edge of the cliff. This time, it wasn't Liper who explained the fourth phase, it was a woman dressed in the uniform of the Hunter Association. From this point on, each of you will complete the trial in the order of arrival. Once one person departs, the next must wait 2 minutes before following, she announced. Please also be aware, you'll need to survive on Guard Island for 7 days, completely on your own. After those 7 days, you must return to this spot with at least 6 points to pass. With that said, Candidate 1, please proceed. There were no names, only numbers, since this entire hunt would revolve around the numbered badges each candidate now carried. As the first candidate to qualify, Ush stepped forward without hesitation and calmly walked into the forest ahead. There was no point in waiting for his target, because TCH. Someone's planning to come after me the second we land, huh? Alright then. Bring it on. Ush strolled casually into the dense woods, deliberately not rushing. 2 minutes later. Whoosh. The second candidate, Hisoka, vanished in a blur. Seeing this, even Jiraiya, Killua, and Hanzo couldn't help but widen their eyes in shock. They realized their reflexes couldn't even register Hisoka's movement. This discovery hit hard, especially for Hanzo and Killua, who had always considered themselves among the strongest. But their instincts weren't wrong. Compared to average people, they were top tier. But compared to the strongest within the world of Nen users, they were barely on the lower end. Sure, they could overpower third-rate Nen users. But against a seasoned second-rate fighter? They didn't stand a chance. Second-rate Nen users typically had significantly more aura, sharper skills, and, most importantly, well-developed personal Nen abilities. There was another key factor: those who trained their Nen thoroughly, particularly in enhancement, would see a dramatic boost in physical strength. Even someone without exceptional natural talent, once trained in Nen, could increase their raw power tenfold. Let's say someone's normal strength was around 100 kilograms pre-Nen. Once trained, even if they weren't enhancers or emitters, they could reach ton-level physical strength. Even low-tier talents could break the 10-ton mark. Compared to that, how many people had talents like Killua or Hanzo? Before awakening Nen, Killua had already reached astonishing levels of strength, and Hanzo, trained as a ninja, had gone through intense physical conditioning. But among all the people trained with Hanzo, how many could surpass him? Very few. Even with rigorous training, average talents could only hit 1 to 2 tons of strength, mainly because this world's humans had high physical potential, but Nen was the real game changer. 10 seconds after Hisoka vanished, the rest of the candidates snapped back to reality, now extremely anxious. Many began worrying, what if I'm Hisoka's target? Some even feared running into him before finding their own prey. But fear or not, this was the danger of the fourth phase, and unless they wanted to drop out, there was no avoiding it. They'd made it this far. No one was quitting now. Hisoka. It looks like he's heading toward Ush. Gon suddenly said, eyes wide. What? That's bad news, Leorio exclaimed. There's nothing we can do. He'll have to handle it on his own, Killua said, shrugging slightly. Ush is stronger than we know, Kurapika added calmly. Don't forget, he escaped the Warship Island test several hours faster than Hisoka. The events on the island had allowed the candidates to get a sense of each other's abilities. Because of that, some of them genuinely worried about Ush. But whether they worried or not, the reality was already in motion. Ush and Hisoka were about to face off. Watching Hisoka sprint toward him, Ush was startled by his speed. His own base speed was clearly much slower. Thankfully, he could manipulate his weight. By adjusting himself to 10 kilograms, Ush could boost his speed noticeably. And if he dropped to just 1 kilogram, his speed would skyrocket. After all, at 50 kilograms, he could run 10 meters per second. Cutting that down to 1 kilogram meant a 50x reduction in weight, and with the same contact area, the reduced resistance would boost his speed to nearly 30 meters per second. No, it wouldn't reach something absurd like 500 meters per second. Air resistance increases sharply with speed. To be honest, the human body wasn't exactly aerodynamic. If Ush had a proper airfoil or wind-braking mechanism in front of him, maybe he could go even faster. Of course, raw speed wasn't everything. Ush also had his distance perception ability. For him, it wasn't just about moving quickly, it was about reaction time and processing speed. Unfortunately, Nen didn't enhance those things automatically, unless it was through a specialized Nen ability. In fact, Nen didn't offer temporary stat boosts by default. It was more about consistent enhancement and technique refinement. Its true power lay in amplifying attacks, developing unique abilities, and sharpening existing traits. Chapter 64. What exactly is the temporary increase in attack power granted by Nen? Yes, that's right, Ush understood this concept quite well after becoming a Nen user. While it's true that Nen can enhance the body, this only applies to regular physical training. Temporary enhancements apply only to attack power and defense. Whether it's Ten, Ren, or Ken, they all work this way. So what's the difference between attack power and physical strength? It's simple. Attack power is the destructive force you can exert on another object. Physical strength is the total capability of your body, your speed, stamina, force, and resilience. There's a clear difference between the two. If you only boost your attack power, your speed won't improve much. But if you increase your physical strength, your speed naturally increases as well. That's why, when Nen users train using Ten, Ren, or Ken, their movement speed doesn't increase dramatically, unless they have a special Nen ability to enhance it. Take Killua's electricity or Hisoka's elasticity, for example. These kinds of Nen abilities allow explosive growth in both attack and movement. True power emerges when both internal strength and Nen-based abilities grow together. After all, if someone's base strength is only 1, even with 10,000 aura units, their total attack power is still 10,000. But if their base strength is 10, and their aura is just 1,000, they can still reach that 10,000 mark. Of course, a master who can control 10,000 aura units is unlikely to have a base strength of only 1. The more someone develops their body, the more they can improve both their aura capacity and potential aura. So, someone with great raw strength isn't necessarily a master-level Nen user. But a master-level Nen user definitely has a strong physical foundation. This is why enhancers have the highest raw attack power of all Nen types. The key factor isn't just the amount of aura, it's the efficiency with which one can use Nen techniques. For example, consider Gon and Killua. Killua awakened his Nen when his physical strength was already at 16 tons. Gon awakened his Nen at just 4 tons of strength. But after training, Gon quickly began catching up. By the time Killua's strength reached 64 tons, Gon was nearly matching him, and Gon's efficiency was only 20% lower. Maybe even less. After all, some people have Nen types that don't match their aura nature. Ush, for instance, seemed to have a unique trait. From the way his Nen worked, he was likely skewed toward emission, with strong leanings toward conjuration and transmutation as well. Perhaps he had something like 95% affinity with the specialist category, 85% with conjuration, 75% with transmutation. But all that theorizing didn't change his current reality. Ush's physical strength was still relatively weak. Compared to Hisoka's likely tens of tons of strength, Ush only had around 3 tons of force. The gap was massive. Luckily, Ush had a way to compensate. By instantly increasing his weight to 10,000 kilograms at the moment of impact, he could still pack serious power. That's why Ush couldn't fight with weapons or attack from a distance. He couldn't alter the weight of objects, only his own body. Ken. As Hisoka charged, Ush entered a Ken state and reduced his weight to 1 kilogram. Then, he moved. He activated his distance ability, and whoosh! Ush blasted forward, leaping around 50 meters in a single burst, landing directly in front of Hisoka. He raised his hand, fingers curled into a beak shape, and thrust it swiftly toward Hisoka's neck. In a real battle, you go for the kill. Especially when the enemy is doing the same. Ush didn't try to attack from long range using his ability, he didn't believe his killing intent would escape Hisoka's detection. In that case, it was better to fight up close and personal. Wham! Hisoka was caught off guard by Ush's speed, but his reflexes kicked in. His head snapped back, dodging the strike, and his left hand shot up in a counter thrust toward Ush's face. Ush remained calm. He pivoted slightly to the left, dodging Hisoka's counter while arcing his right palm like a spear, aiming again for Hisoka's neck. Feeling the pressure of the incoming strike, Hisoka didn't panic. Instead, he smiled, flushed with excitement. His legs suddenly bent as he dropped low, lying flat in a dodging motion to evade Ush's thrust. He pushed off with his right hand, twisting his body and swinging his left leg up in a brutal arc toward Ush's right knee. If that strike landed, Ush would likely lose balance or worse, lose control of his leg for a few seconds. And even a few seconds of vulnerability could spell disaster. However, that was assuming Hisoka could break through Ush's aura barrier. Could Hisoka's physical strike penetrate the Nen shield around Ush's body? The answer was, probably not. Not unless Hisoka could exert over 3,000 kilograms of impact force. Which was unlikely. So, while the fight looked tense, in reality Ush was mostly using this as combat training, a chance to hone his melee skills. As Hisoka's sweeping kick approached, Ush swiftly retracted his right foot and pulled his knee back, narrowly avoiding the attack. At the same time, he twisted his upper body and let the motion drive another backhand strike straight toward Hisoka's neck. Swish. Naturally, Hisoka wouldn't let himself get hit so easily. With his right hand still pressed to the ground, he shoved himself sideways, pushing his body to the left. Even during evasive maneuvers, Hisoka didn't stop attacking. His left leg whipped around like a striking snake, this time aiming at Ush's left leg, the only one still grounded. Chapter 65. Swish. The battle between Ush and Hisoka continued. Unlike typical Nen user combat, often relying on brute strength, blocks, and direct counters, the fight between Ush and Hisoka was a display of technical finesse and psychological warfare. Neither of them aimed to clash head-on or tank each other's attacks. Instead, they focused on dodging and counterattacking with precision. Every evasion was paired with a strike. Every movement was meant to exploit an opening. The battle had become a high-stakes chess match, each side trying to outmaneuver and outthink the other. From the outside, it was an exhilarating spectacle. But only the fighters knew how intense it really was. For example, Ush, he had been trying to find a clean opportunity to land a decisive hit, but after so many exchanges, he was starting to feel the pressure. Compared to a seasoned veteran like Hisoka, Ush was clearly lacking in fundamentals. Even with his powerful, almost cheat-like Nen abilities, there were limits to how much he could compensate for the gap in raw speed and reaction time. This wasn't a problem he could solve mid-fight, it was foundational. Until Ush had a complete training system, especially in enhancing his base Nen techniques, he would always lag behind top-tier Nen users like Hisoka. So how was Ush managing to keep up? That credit went to his distance-based perception. That unique visual enhancement allowed him to anticipate movements in a way that shaved milliseconds off his reaction time, letting him follow Hisoka's speed despite his own slower reflexes. Of course, neither of them was going all out. If they did, the destructive force of the battle would have been significantly higher, and the environment around them might not have survived the onslaught. Ush also knew that no matter how hard he hit, Hisoka could still sense his killing intent. Even when Ush infused every strike with Ko, Hisoka was able to react and dodge. Likewise, Hisoka couldn't harm Ush as long as he failed to break through Ush's aura shield, end of the world. So in essence, neither could truly defeat the other, not at this stage. And it seemed Ush wouldn't get the chance to push things further either. After 15 minutes of intense exchange, Hisoka suddenly gathered his pink aura at his feet and bounced out of the battle zone. The movement was so fast that Ush couldn't follow it with a naked eye. That alone showed how terrifying Hisoka's speed could be with Nen-enhanced motion. As Hisoka landed a distance away, Ush paused and called out, "Done already?" "It's not quite time yet," Hisoka replied, squinting at Ush as though studying an unripe, shimmering fruit. "You're still too physically weak. You haven't undergone proper enhancement training yet." Ush wasn't surprised by this evaluation. Any veteran Nen user could tell that while his aura techniques were strong, his body still had a long way to go. "Can't help it. I didn't inherit anything like you did," Ush replied casually. That answer only made Hisoka more intrigued. Someone who'd grown this much without formal training or inheritance? Hisoka's curiosity, and bloodlust, only grew stronger. An unripe apple that sparkled like that? He'd have to be patient. Not yet. Not yet. He smiled, clearly in a great mood. So then, what's your number? Hisoka asked playfully. Number 188. What, am I your target? Ush asked, though he didn't believe it. Even if he were, it would just mean another round of fighting. But the truth was, Ush was running out of steam. That 15-minute exchange had drained him, and maintaining Ken throughout the battle had burned through his aura reserves. Out of his 30,000-point aura pool, he was now down to less than half. At best, he could fight Hisoka for another 10 minutes before needing to conserve energy. If it was going to end in a draw, then continuing would be a waste of time and energy. Still, fighting Hisoka had given him invaluable combat experience. Too bad. You're not my target, Hisoka said, sounding genuinely disappointed. Though it was hard to tell whether he was more disappointed about the number or Ush's current level of strength. I'm number 44. So, am I your target? Hisoka asked hopefully. Ush raised an eyebrow and smirked. Obviously not. In that case, no point in continuing, Hisoka said, his tone relaxed. Then let's call it, Ush agreed, equally calm. It's time to go, Hisoka replied cheerfully. Neither of them said anything more. Silence. They stared at each other for 10 long seconds. Swish. In a flash, both disappeared from the spot. Where Hisoka went, Ush didn't know. In fact, he wasn't even sure where he himself would head next. But it didn't matter. This fight had taught him a lot, specifically, where his weaknesses were. He needed to fix the following. He couldn't control his killing intent effectively. His physical strength was still far too low. He lacked a true high-power offensive technique. These were problems almost every isekai protagonist faced. After all, coming from a peaceful modern world, how could he possibly have the combat experience or training others had? But that was fine. Once he completed the hunter exam and officially became a hunter, he could access the spiritual flow training system. And once that happened, he could patch up all his weaknesses, easily. In less than a year, he had gone from a total novice to someone capable of holding his own against Hisoka. If that didn't scream boundless potential, what did? Chapter 66. Swish. Ush leapt to the edge of a high cliff and stood there, overlooking Guard Island, scanning the landscape for his prey. It shouldn't have been this troublesome. But after 15 minutes of intense fighting with Hisoka, he lost track of his assigned target. Left with no choice, he climbed to higher ground to get a better view. Thanks to his distance ability, Ush could easily scan every corner of the terrain. If he didn't spot his target in one direction, he'd simply switch to another. After shifting his gaze twice, Ush finally locked eyes on his quarry. He grinned. Found you. I'd better catch her quickly. She's probably getting impatient. I don't want to fight another first-rate Nen user. It's such a pain if it turns into a drawn-out match, Ush muttered as he raised his foot, stepping toward his target. With that step, he crossed layers of space, instantly traveling several kilometers. Deep in a forest, a confident woman with a sniper rifle was sprinting gracefully through the trees, her footsteps slight and precise. She kept herself hidden, eyes cautiously scanning the area, especially the suspicious-looking man ahead with nails embedded in his face. Her name was Shizuku, candidate number 80. Her target? Candidate number 301, the man ahead. She was waiting for the perfect opportunity to snipe her prey. She believed that if she could line up a clean shot, this test would be over in seconds. But the opportunity never came. So, she waited patiently. Finally, her target, Jiretta, wandered off behind a tree to relieve himself. Her eyes sharpened. Now's my chance. Shizuko gripped her sniper rifle, lining up the shot, finger ready on the trigger. Then, I'd advise you not to shoot. You'll die. A calm male voice came from behind her. Bang! Her heart skipped a beat. She abandoned her aim and rolled instinctively to the side. Mid-roll, she flipped over, raising her sniper rifle toward the voice. There, leaning casually against a tree with a badge in hand, stood Ush. That badge. Her eyes widened in shock. She quickly reached toward her hidden stash to check her number tag. It was gone. Vanished without her even noticing. Which meant, Ush was her hunter. No need to look, Ush said casually. You won't get it back. But I did save your life, so. You're welcome. With that, he tucked the badge away, waved lazily, and vanished in a blur. Shizuku hadn't even had time to react before he was gone. She turned toward Joretta, who was now staring back in their direction, visibly suspicious. She bit her lip, frustrated. She had completely failed this hunt. But, saved her life? She wasn't convinced at first. Then she thought back to Ush's speed. And the glimpse she'd gotten of his fight with Hisoka earlier, it had looked terrifying, even from a distance. She glanced at Joretta again, feeling a bit uneasy. If Ush thought Joretta was a more dangerous opponent than her, that said a lot. Luckily, Joretta didn't make a move toward her. She wasn't his target, after all. As for what Shizuku would do next, Ush didn't know, and frankly, he didn't care. His goal now was to find a comfortable place to spend the next few days before returning to the airship to complete the fourth test. After being abruptly woken for the start of this phase, he hadn't even had time to drink any water. Then there was the extended fight with Hisoka, which had left him drained. And finally, he'd spent time tracking and tagging his prey. Half a day already gone, he thought. Still haven't eaten or drunk anything. This wasn't sustainable. Wilderness survival? That wasn't Ush's thing. Not because he couldn't do it, he just didn't want to. Why suffer unnecessarily? If you had a choice, wouldn't you pick comfort over hardship? Everyone yearns for good living conditions. The better the environment, the better the mood. After some searching, Ush found a small lake. He nodded in satisfaction. Perfect? He decided to settle there for the remainder of the test. Nothing too extravagant, just enough to build a simple shelter with room for a bed and some rest. Eh? Ush? Ush? He heard a familiar voice calling from across the lake. Looking over, he saw a spiky-haired boy waving excitedly, "Gone." Ush sighed and gave a small wave back. Yo. Gon's hyper-friendliness was something Ush had already seen before. Despite only briefly chatting on Warship Island, mostly through Kurapika, Gon treated Ush like an old friend. He wasn't even worried that Ush might be his target. Ush, have you found your target yet? Gon called out. I have. What about you? Ush called back, knowingly throwing the question back at him. Ugh. Gon looked surprised. You already finished? I haven't yet. My target is Hisoka, so I've got to practice stealing his badge somehow. Ooh. Well, good luck with that, Ush said, nodding. Thanks, Gon yelled back, full of enthusiasm. Then he went back to planning his next move. Ush, meanwhile, glanced at a tree behind Gon, then quietly began gathering materials to build a shelter. And maybe store a corpse or two. Chapter 67. Perfect? Time flew by, and Ush, having finished building the shelter he'd live in for the next few days, looked at the small house in front of him with satisfaction. The structure was mostly made of large leaves, while the frame consisted of relatively straight branches. The house wasn't tall, only about 1.5 meters high, so anyone inside had to bend over to move around. But that was fine. It was just a place to sleep. There was no need for extra height, building taller would have just meant more work. Inside, Ush laid out a simple rattan bed. He added a door made from woven branches and leaves. With that, the shelter was complete. While constructing it, Ush had also collected water, so he wasn't thirsty anymore. Food, however, was another story. His stomach was starting to growl. Time to catch some fish and fill up. Swish. Arriving at the lake, Ush spotted Gon on the far side, casting his fishing rod toward an apple hanging from a tree. Ah, there he is, Ush thought casually as he squatted by the water's edge and plunged his hand into the lake. Splash. A second later, he pulled out a wriggling, energetic fish, its tail slapping wildly against his hand. Hey, there's a crab here too, Ush said in surprise. Without hesitation, he reached again. This time, he caught both a fat lake fish and a large crab, its claws clicking defensively. Not bad, not bad. Looks like I'm eating well today, Ush said with a satisfied grin. He returned to his little house with the fresh catch, gathered some firewood, and started a fire to begin roasting his meal. Watching from a hidden perch nearby, Jaretta silently scoffed at Ush's behavior. In Jaretta's mind, making a fire in the middle of a hunter-and-hunted survival test was the height of stupidity. Sure, it got you cooked food. But it also made you a beacon for everyone else in the forest. Still. Jaretta thought back to the earlier fight between Ush and Hisoka. Forget it, he thought. Someone like that. I wouldn't pick a fight with him unless he was my assigned prey. Eventually, he redirected his focus toward his actual target, adopting a classic ostrich strategy. If he didn't look at Ush, maybe Ush wouldn't look at him. Unaware of Jaretta's silent judgment, Ush was lost in thought while tending his fire. With this much smoke, the Hunter Association observers should find me easily, he mused. If they missed logging my prey capture earlier, it could affect my score. Still. Do those staff even carry food? They have to, right? No way they'd survive 7 days without supplies. He shook his head and turned his attention back to the grill. The fish sizzled over the fire, and the crab was skewered and slowly roasting nearby. The rich aroma drifted into the air, and straight into Ush's nose. During the cooking process, Ush swallowed his saliva more than 20 times. He was really hungry. Finally, the fish and crab were done. To give them some extra flavor, Ush sprinkled on some chili flakes he'd gathered earlier from the forest. He'd ground them himself using a simple method, rubbing the peppers between his hands until they flaked apart. SSSSS. Crunch. Clack. He took a big bite. Spicy, hot, and absolutely delicious. While Ush ate, the candidates scattered across the forest all looked toward the same spot on the horizon. A thin column of white smoke rose into the sky. The moment they saw it, they all knew exactly what it was. Someone had started a campfire. And almost universally, the reaction was the same. Whoever started that fire is a complete idiot. Still, just to be sure it wasn't their target, nearly all of them began heading toward the smoke. And so, what should have been a covert survival challenge turned into something else. In less than half a day on the island, 16 out of 24 remaining candidates ended up gathering at the edge of the same small lake. They stared awkwardly at one another, surprised, and a little irritated, to see so many others. Even Jaretta, who had been hiding and preparing to ambush Gon, was spotted and called out by Killua after he arrived. At this point, even Leorio figured out that Jaretta's target was likely Gon. Up until now, the whole test had a nice air of mystery. You didn't know who was hunting you, or who your prey was. But now? Thanks to one careless exposure, the whole dynamic had shifted. Many of the examinees now knew, or could easily guess, who was hunting whom. If this wasn't handled properly, things could descend into a chaotic free-for-all. And at the center of it all? One man. A guy still cheerfully munching on grilled fish and crab. The same man that every candidate had just mentally labeled an idiot. Now made them feel like they were the idiots. They had all gathered in this one open area because of some smoke in the air, accidentally forming a mini-exam arena. The atmosphere grew tense. Everyone began keeping their distance, silently watching the others. They knew full well, among this crowd were not just prey, but hunters. Time passed slowly. The only sounds were the breeze. and Ush biting through crab shells. Crunch. Clack. Crunch. The noise was oddly loud, but no one paid him any mind. They were all too focused on each other. At that moment, Ush felt it. Someone was watching him. And it definitely wasn't a love-struck admirer. In this kind of atmosphere, the only one spying on him was likely his assigned hunter. Chapter 68. Swish. Under the tense, suffocating atmosphere, someone finally snapped. Unable to bear it any longer, one candidate suddenly bolted toward the prey they'd been tracking. At this point, they didn't care about subtlety. All that mattered was grabbing the badge as quickly as possible and escaping the growing standoff. If things dragged on until nightfall, it would become much harder for someone without heightened perception. Even if they managed to snag a badge, they might not even notice being targeted in return. Swish. With the first candidate breaking the stalemate, the rest quickly followed. They lunged at their respective targets. Those whose prey weren't present either supported teammates in attacking others, or stayed on high alert, watching for their own hunters. In an instant, the calm lakeside gathering had erupted into total chaos. Wow! Are we really doing the Battle Royale plot again? Ush muttered as he watched the madness unfold. Wasn't this handled differently in the manga? Swish. As if on cue, Ush felt a sudden gust of wind rushing toward him. He squinted slightly, eyes narrowing. Sure enough, a candidate was charging straight at him, looking excited, like they were about to secure a major win. Ush smiled under the stunned gaze of the attacker. He looked absolutely amused. Finding out someone was actually trying to hunt him made everything more interesting. Even better, he recognized the guy. Amori, the second of the Morley brothers. Back in the tunnel, Ush had threatened him. And now this guy actually thought he could take Ush's badge? Gotta respect the confidence. Without moving a muscle, Ush simply sat in place, calmly watching Amori approach. Seeing Ush's casual, fearless expression, Amori faltered. But then he gritted his teeth and kept charging. Even if he couldn't win, he had to try. Bad idea. As soon as he came within 1 meter of Ush, Amori's vision went black. Thud. He collapsed to the ground, sending a puff of dust into the air. If he hadn't lost his qualification yet, he was dangling on the edge of it now. Ush didn't even look wise. He just glanced at Amori, shrugged, and went back to eating his crab. Meanwhile, someone else had been watching the scene closely. A bald-headed figure darted out of hiding. Swish. Hanzo appeared next to the fallen Amori, swiftly found and snatched the badge from his chest. Thanks, Hanzo grinned, tapping 2 fingers to his forehead in a mock salute. Then, without another word, he disappeared, likely going back into hiding. Time passed, and where there had once been 16 standing candidates, most were now lying on the ground. Only a few remained upright. Ush? Hanzo. Gone, Killua, Kurapika, and Leorio. Badoro and Buara. As it turned out, Badoro and Buara had been lucky, their prey and their hunters had turned out to be each other. So, instead of fighting multiple opponents, they only had to win a one-on-one. It was practically a free pass. As for Jiraiya, the strong, silent contender, why had he failed to get Gon's badge? Because he had no teammates. Facing Gon's group of 4, including Killua, what chance did he have? Sure enough, Gon declared that he didn't want Jiraiya's badge, and neither Kurapika nor Killua needed it either. After discussing it, they decided that if Leorio couldn't find Banzu, they'd just give the badge to him. Leorio was grateful, and Gon returned to training, still determined to take Hisoka's badge with his own hands. Watching this, Ush could hardly believe it. Seriously? You're going to challenge someone like Hisoka? That's not brave, that's suicidal. In Ush's mind, you didn't challenge someone that far above your level. That wasn't courage, it was stupidity. Obviously, Gon still didn't understand just how outmatched he was. Good thing I'm not close with this kid, Ush thought. I'd probably get myself killed trying to save him someday. He remembered how Kite had nearly died thanks to Gon's recklessness. Terrifying. Only someone with the luck of a protagonist survives that stuff. Watching Gon train from afar, Ush chuckled to himself, until a thought struck him. Wait a second. Why do I feel like I'm being targeted now? While Gon continued practicing, still set on stealing Hisoka's badge, Leorio was struggling. He couldn't find Ponzu anywhere. Meanwhile, Kurapika and Killua had already secured their points, and Gon had his target. But Leorio hadn't even seen a glimpse of his prey. Kurapika, Killua, you two go on ahead to the coast. I'll look for her myself, Leorio said. Now that the plot had deviated from the original version, and with no hunter chasing him, Leorio figured there was no reason to drag them along. Both Kurapika and Killua were guaranteed to pass the test already. There was no need for them to scour the island with him looking for a girl who didn't want to be found. Eh? You sure you can find someone hiding on this huge island all by yourself? Killua asked with his hands in his pockets. He's got a point, Kurapika added. Almost everyone gathered here earlier, and Ponzu didn't show. Either she's hiding somewhere far from where the smoke rows, or she's trapped somewhere and can't move at all. Chapter 69. Perfect? Ush had clearly overheard Leorio, Kurapika, and Killua's conversation. While still munching on his crab, he listened like someone watching an episode of an anime. But once he finished his meal, Ush lost interest. Whether they found Ponzu or not had little to do with him. All he needed to do now was survive in this area for a few more days and wait for the Hunter Association to return and pick up the qualified candidates. It was boring, sure, but at least he could use the time to work on refining his miracle fruit abilities. Yes, Ush had made up his mind, it was time to sit down and carefully design more fruits. Whether he wanted to or not, this had to be done. His Nen ability was one with tremendous potential, but without proper development, relying only on devil fruits or their tangible equivalents would be foolish. Not to mention, even among devil fruits, there were many gaps in ability types. Some powers simply didn't exist yet, or at least hadn't been seen. If that's the case, then Ush would have to create them himself. It was a natural path of growth, self-designed fruits. However, Ush also understood that more fruits didn't always mean better results. His ability manifested fruits at random, consuming a proportional amount of aura for each. So, the more fruits in the same category or tier, the lower the chance of summoning the exact one he wanted in a crisis. That randomness might be acceptable during casual combat, but in life or death moments, it could be a fatal flaw. So now, Ush saw two possible directions. Option 1. Create a large number of fruit types to cover as many scenarios as possible, then add a limiting condition to his ability that narrows the fruit pool when needed. Examples of such conditions. Each time you use a restricted fruit, your Nen consumption doubles permanently. After using a specific fruit, you enter an enforced absolute fruit state, inability to use Nen, and the downtime increases with each use. But these were heavy restrictions. Ush found them far too punishing. Just thinking about them gave him a headache. So he threw that option out. Option 2. Create a small number of highly versatile fruits, each one capable of handling a wide range of situations. This option didn't require setting up extra conditions or drawbacks. However, it did mean that each fruit needed to be extremely well developed, with layered functions and refined utility. That would take significant effort, practice, and knowledge. To be honest, if Ush didn't have his distance ability helping him absorb life energy, and his miracle fruit ability functioning with autonomous drive, he might have had no choice but to go with the first option. After all, under normal circumstances, a fruit requiring 10,000 aura points could only last 16 minutes in battle. Once that time passed, he'd have to manifest another fruit, and it would be a random one. That kind of unreliability made the first option feel risky. But with his current setup, a single fruit could last for 3 months, even indefinitely, as long as he stayed alive and maintained its energy. That's why the fruit I design needs to be as versatile as possible, Ush muttered as he scratched his cheek. The focus isn't on sheer strength, but on precision and adaptability. Given his aura capacity, the best strategy was to design fruits that could be manifested at low aura costs. The higher the required aura, the less likely it would appear in battle. Ugh, this is getting complicated. Still, Ush began brainstorming ability types. Psychic/Nen Force. Transformation. Particle Control. Illusion Embodiment. Eventually, he crossed out Particle Control and Illusion Manifestation. Those were too powerful, and would likely require aura volumes over 2000, making them hard to manifest under normal conditions. That left two, Psychic Force and Transformation. Both could be fine-tuned by scaling down their power. Ush particularly liked the idea of transformation. His mind drifted to the transformation technique from Dragon Ball, the one Nulong used. That ability wasn't meant for combat, but it could become anything, a missile, a vehicle, a bird, a fish. It could grow larger, shrink, replicate objects. Its practicality was off the charts. Now, don't get it twisted, Ush wasn't designing this so he could eat transformed animals himself. He wasn't going to raise a high IQ animal just to devour it later. Instead, he imagined having a pet that could transform on command. That alone would open up a world of tactical flexibility. And thanks to his ability to autonomously recharge aura via life energy absorption, the energy cost wouldn't be a problem. The only thing bothering him now was the season. Since it was winter, his miracle fruit could only exist in one quality type. That meant if he manifested a peach, then for the time being, all miracle fruits would only be peaches. That kind of limitation sucked. But, Ush muttered, rubbing his chin, once I reach a level where I've essentially become immortal, even if I want to develop an entirely new Nen ability to support the miracle fruit, it won't be that hard. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he was that he was on the right path. The possibilities motivated him further. He decided that the miracle fruit system needed to be tiered, something like 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, no grade. This would help regulate complexity and balance. To Ush, 1st grade would correspond to the awakened state of a devil fruit. That would be the ultimate goal. But for now, he would take his time, developing each grade step by step, mastering them thoroughly. Chapter 70. The 3rd grade Nen power fruit could only function on a macro level, with a strength output capped at around 1 ton. The 2nd grade Nen power fruit also operated at the macro level, but its strength reached up to 100 tons. Once it reached 1st grade, the power extended into the microscopic level, but at the cost of reduced strength, dropping to around 100 kilograms. As for the no-grade fruit, it dealt in universal forces, quantum-level manipulation, and cosmic constructs. It was more of a mythical concept, something Ush had imagined and categorized, but not something he truly expected to ever manifest. To match the oolong transformation fruit concept, Ush had divided it into 3 tiers as well. 2nd grade reflected what oolong showed in the anime, basic transformations. 1st grade acted like a kind of awakening, allowing for transformation of external objects. No grade was a mythological level fruit, one capable of transforming anything in existence, from black holes to microscopic organisms, even interdimensional beings. It was the kind of fruit that, realistically, Ush would probably never manifest. But hey, everyone's allowed to dream, right? What if it really does appear one day? There weren't many more fruits Ush needed to design. These 2 core fruit abilities, Nen power and transformation, combined with enough academic knowledge, could already handle a wide variety of situations. In fact, if his power evolved further, he might even be able to access fruits similar to the Opot fruit, Opop no Mi. These foundational fruit types were designed primarily to compensate for low-grade abilities. The high-grade fruits, in contrast, didn't need any effort from him. The existing canon devil fruits were already plentiful and extremely versatile. After all, they were the combined imagination of an entire world. Russell Ush jotted down the 2 fruits he had finalized in a small notebook he had brought from the airship. Then, carefully, he sketched out a fruit design for each. This step was necessary. Without an image, his miracle fruit ability wouldn't recognize them as valid. To support this, Ush had also prepared a massive illustrated reference book back in York New City. That book served as a growing catalog for all known devil fruits and mythical fruits. For those that didn't have canon designs, he filled in the artwork himself. The notes from his current notebook would be added to the master book once he returned. Tap. With a final stroke, Ush finished recording the new fruits. He glanced over them one last time before putting the notebook away. Now it was time to see if he could actually manifest the fruits he'd designed. Until now, it had all been theory, speculation and hypothesis. Only a successful embodiment would prove he was on the right track. As for the kilogram fruit he still had, it was no longer important. There were no more enemies coming for him during the 4th test. Hisoka wouldn't attack now, and the remaining candidates weren't strong enough to challenge him. So, there was no need to keep clinging to the kilogram fruit. After all, Ush wasn't just a kilogram fruit user. Why hold on to it forever? If anything, it would be better to eventually replace it with a Logia-type devil fruit if the opportunity arose. 2,000 aura points gathered. A fruit slowly materialized in front of him. Is this the imitation fruit? With the new fruit forming, the kilogram fruit immediately disappeared from his body. Ush shrugged, then popped the imitation fruit into his mouth without hesitation. Another 2,000 aura points, another fruit. This time, it was the thorn fruit. A decent ability, powerful if used correctly, but Ush wasn't a fan of having thorns erupting from his body. Still, for the sake of experimentation, he ate it. Better to test now than wait for it to expire. One after another, Ush continued manifesting and consuming fruits. The vast majority were devil fruits he already knew. Rubber fruit, dice fruit, spring fruit, bomb fruit, wheel fruit, spin fruit. 8 attempts in a row. 16,000 aura points spent, and still none of his custom fruits had appeared. It was frustrating. Ush hadn't expected his luck to be this bad. He started to wonder if all his theories had been wrong, maybe the system really couldn't manifest his original fruits. That lingering doubt began to eat at him. One more try. Refusing to give up, Ush gathered his aura again, another 2,000 points. Poof. Suddenly, Ush's eyes widened. Then his lips curled into a grin. Success. The fruit he summoned this time was none other than the Oolong transformation fruit. Without wasting a second, Ush stuffed it into his mouth. Since he had no test subjects or pets, he'd have to try it out on himself. But first, he glanced over at a Hunter Association staff member nearby who'd been watching him. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Then turned and, step by step, walked out of the staffer's line of sight. Once he found a secluded area, Ush began the experiment. All right. First test, transform into a grizzly bear. He focused. Poof. A puff of smoke. Ush vanished, and in his place stood a 3-meter-tall grizzly bear. It looked a little strange, but unmistakably real. Chapter 71. The 4th test of the Hunter exam was taking place in an uninhabited forest on Guard Island, and candidate number 188, Ush, had seemingly vanished. In his place stood a strange-looking grizzly bear, 3 eyes, 6 ears, and mismatched limbs, one arm long, the other short. The creature looked awkward and unnatural. But yes, this was Ush. The bear's face wore a very human expression of frustration as it examined its limbs and fur. Poof! The bizarre grizzly bear suddenly vanished. Thump! In its place was now a table. A flat, wooden table. Had Ush been able to view himself from an outside perspective, he would have shouted, "Wait a minute! Isn't this my desk?" And he would have been right. Because this table was the exact replica of the one from his home, reproduced through transformation. Unlike the awkward grizzly bear, the transformation into the table was much more successful. Afterward, Ush tested a variety of transformations, some based on familiar objects, some unfamiliar. But eventually, he came to a frustrating realization. I really didn't expect that transformation requires me to understand the object's structure. Damn it. Returning to his human form, Ush scratched his head and sighed in annoyance. Watching Oolong and Puar transform so easily in Dragon Ball, he'd assumed transformation was a piece of cake. But he'd forgotten, Oolong and Puar attended a transformation kindergarten for several years before mastering their skills. They probably didn't just practice transforming, they also studied the structure and properties of the objects they were mimicking. This wasn't some simple ability he could perfect overnight. To master it, he'd either need to accumulate experience slowly or find a method to upload object information directly into his brain. Unfortunately, he had no such method. So, for now, Ush reluctantly gave up on the Oolong transformation fruit for combat use. It just wasn't as useful to him as the kilogram fruit, especially when paired with his distance ability. Currently, Ush had about 30,000 aura points in total. Each manifestation cost 2,000 points, meaning he could attempt about 15 fruits before needing to rest. Whenever he burned through all his aura, he would fall into a state of extreme fatigue. There was a workaround. By forcing himself to train using Go or Ren, he could stimulate faster aura regeneration and even expand his total capacity. But that method came at a steep cost, lifespan. For most people without natural talent, it drained life energy for minimal gains. Ush, however, was naturally gifted. He could use that method to rapidly grow stronger. But he chose not to. Not because he was lazy, but because he had better options. Why recklessly sacrifice lifespan when he could reach top-tier strength within a year just by training normally? Now, if he were in a crisis or had no other choice? Sure, then he'd gladly trade life for power. After all, Ush was confident he'd one day develop a fruit that could extend his own lifespan. Until then, he wasn't going to waste years of his life just because he was impatient. And most importantly, needless fatigue in the hunter exam was dangerous. After failing to manifest a desirable fruit 15 times in a row, Ush decided to rest. He took a quick wash, ate a little something, and went to bed. Meanwhile, his assigned exam monitor was practically losing their mind. Perched in a nearby tree, the staffer stared unblinkingly at the small shelter Ush had built, terrified he'd disappear again. The next morning, Ush woke up early and headed out to find breakfast. When he reached the lake, he spotted Gon standing at the water's edge, eyes locked on the lake's surface. Just then, a small insect hovered above the water, attempting to drink. In the next instant, a fish burst from beneath the surface and snapped it up. Swish! But before the fish could escape, a small bird, lying in wait above, dove down like an arrow and snatched the fish in its claws. Just as the bird started to fly away, a fishing line whipped around it, perfectly cast from Gon's rod. With a pull, the bird, and the fish, came reeling back toward Gon. It all happened in a flash. Ush, moved by reflex, reached out and caught the fish just before it fell into Gon's hands. Both of them froze. Gon blinked, stunned. Ush stood still, fish in hand. "Nice technique," Ush said casually, keeping a straight face. "Keep it up." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked off like nothing happened. "Thanks, Ush. I'll do my best," Gon called out, grinning brightly. Ush didn't respond, just waved over his shoulder and kept walking. "Man, I'm so smooth. That could have been so awkward." Ush looked down at the fish and smiled smugly. Later that morning, fish soup was on the menu. "No pot?" "No problem." Ush found a large flat stone, used his nen to carve out a basin, and created a makeshift stone cauldron. He then heated smaller rocks in the fire and dropped them into the stone pot to boil the water. As for whether those stones were dirty, didn't matter. He wiped them clean. And besides, he wasn't afraid of a little heat loss. Chapter 72. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, the 7th day of the 4th test arrived. Back on the 3rd day, Gon had bid farewell to Ush and gone his own way. Coincidentally, it was also on that day that Ush successfully manifested the neon power fruit. Its power? Only about 1 ton, with a range of just 50 meters. This limited output left Ush feeling a little disappointed, though ultimately, it was enough. Thanks to his distance ability, as long as the energy could leave his body, it still counted as a long-range attack. However, precisely because of his unique ability, neon power, which allowed remote manipulation of objects, didn't synergize well with his combat style. In actual fights, it turned out less effective than simply using his fists. He also discovered that neon power couldn't directly attack living organisms, something like a natural force field around creatures disrupted it. After numerous tests and trials, Ush had to admit, the 3rd grade neon power fruit just isn't suitable for me right now, at least, not in battle. That said, for daily life, it was amazing. In fact, it was the perfect fruit for laziness. Washing, cooking, cleaning? All done with a thought. He didn't even need to lift a finger. And yes, it even allowed him to fly. If not for the upcoming battle scenarios, Ush might have kept it permanently. But since combat effectiveness mattered, he decided to swap it out. So, in the end, Ush manifested another devil fruit to serve as his temporary primary. This time, it was the Heat fruit, a superhuman type ability from the One Piece world. In canon, it belonged to Charlotte Oven, a member of Big Mom's crew. The power, to transfer heat into anything he touched, causing objects, or people, to heat up rapidly. It might not sound too destructive at first, but the lethality was no joke. With this ability, all Ush needed to do was make contact. He could burn people alive, or turn them into walking torches. Not bad. Not bad at all. Compared to his kilogram fruit, this power had a much better chance of damaging someone like Hisoka. In fact, if he were to face Hisoka again now, Ush was confident he could at least injure him. As for seriously injuring or killing him? Well, that would require a few upgrades, like a stronger physical foundation and better control of his killing intent. Outside of battle, the Heat fruit had one more bonus. He no longer needed to build fires to cook food. Blessed be the hot pot god. VRRR. Just as Ush was preparing breakfast, a familiar mechanical noise echoed through the trees. The 4th test is officially over. Please return to the starting point within 1 hour. Candidates who fail to return in time will be disqualified. Badge exchanges after this point will be considered invalid. Exposure of your badge will result in immediate failure. The announcement echoed loudly throughout the forest. Ush, who had just picked up his breakfast, paused mid-motion. Then he sighed. So it's already time, huh? Still holding the stone pot, he began walking casually toward the coast, eating as he went. He didn't bother teleporting with his distance ability, just moved at a normal pace, taking 10-meter steps at a time. Meanwhile, the poor Hunter Association staffer assigned to monitor him was on the brink of collapse. He hadn't slept properly in 7 days. Every time he drifted off, he'd jolt awake in a panic, worried that Ush had vanished again. This cycle of anxiety and exhaustion had turned him into a shell of a man. If he could go back in time, he'd never have volunteered to monitor candidate 188. But alas, there was no such thing as regret medicine. The only thing that kept him going was the knowledge that this hell was nearly over. With just 1 hour left, he was almost free. Looking at Ush strolling ahead, the staffer's dark, panda-like eyes brimmed with hope. I'm alive. Thank God, I survived this nightmare. Unaware of the psychological trauma he had caused, Ush soon arrived at the starting point, where many other candidates were already waiting. "Hey, hey! Even now, you're still eating?" Leorio called out, staring at the stone pot in Ush's hands with disbelief. He and the others had spent the last few days munching on fruits and dry food. Meanwhile, Ush was walking around sipping hot fish soup like he was on vacation. Was the difference between people really that big? People need food. If you skip breakfast, it hurts your stomach, Ush said matter-of-factly. Leorio clenched his fists. Still. Fish soup first thing in the morning? Ush shrugged. You think I want to? It's either fish or animals out here. Of course I'd rather eat milk and toast, but where am I supposed to get that? Leorio grumbled. Still better than dry rations. But Leorio, Gon interrupted, tilting his head. We could have just caught fish too, right? Eh? Leorio frowns. He looked over at Kurapika and Killua, who were conveniently avoiding eye contact. Killua finally said, hands in pockets, yeah. It wasn't hard. Cooking soup's a little tricky, but grilling fish or meat? No big deal. Leorio panicked. But, what if someone saw the fire? They could have come to steal your badge. Kurapika answered calmly, after Rush's white smoke incident, no one tried anything like that again. We figured it was safe enough. And with that, Leorio finally realized. He'd spent the past 3 days hiding while his teammates were having barbecues. Chapter 73. What? Why didn't you tell me about this? Leorio looked at Kurapika in shock. But at that moment, Kurapika looked even more surprised than him. He stared back at Leorio with disbelief. I thought you knew already? Gon? Leorio turned to look at Gon. Gon gave him an awkward, sheepish smile. Then Leorio glanced around at the others, only to realize they all had the same look. In other words, he was the only one who hadn't been barbecuing this entire time. Just him, gnawing on dry rations. Confirming this, Ush looked at Leorio with a strange, slightly amused expression. Ahaha, of course I had barbecue too. No way I wouldn't, right? Haha. Leorio laughed stiffly, holding his head high. But it was clear to everyone, he was just pretending. Still, no one bothered to call him out. Soon after, under the guidance of the Hunter Association staff, the candidates began boarding the airship one by one. As soon as he got on, Ush asked the nearest staffer where the bathroom was. After getting directions, he wasted no time and went straight to bathe. Sure, you could clean yourself on Guard Island, but with a Hunter Association monitor watching you the whole time, and no soap or shampoo available, it wasn't exactly ideal. Now, after 7 days, the smell clinging to his body wasn't terrible. But it definitely wasn't good either. Still, Ush figured he was doing better than Leorio and the others. Those guys hadn't bathed in a full week. While Ush was enjoying his bath, elsewhere on the airship, the Hunter Exams Supervisory Committee had gathered around a table with Chairman Netero. 7 out of 10 are newcomers. Boom, 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 good, good, Netero said, clapping his hands with a wide smile. Is that normal? Buara asked through a mouthful of food. Netero shook his head and laughed. Nope. Usually, only one new hunter comes along every few years. A group like this is rare. This is only the 4th time I've seen it since I became chairman. That rare? Menki looked at Netero in surprise, then turned to Beans. Chairman's been in office that long? How old is he? Beans scratched his head awkwardly. Not exactly sure. But I heard he was already 0 years old. 20 years ago. What? He doesn't look it at all, Menki gasped as she looked back at Netero, who simply smiled and stroked his beard. Sot swallowed the last bite of her food and asked, so, what exactly is our final test going to be? That immediately got everyone's attention. Oh, I've got something unique in mind, Netero said with a cryptic smile. But before that, I'd like to meet these candidates and ask them a few questions. His response left the others puzzled. Meanwhile, Ush had no idea any of this was happening. And honestly, if he did know, he'd probably just nod and say, oh, a duel? That's fine. I've seen this part of the plot. Whether it was the original or a rebooted timeline didn't really matter, as long as it was a duel, it wasn't a problem. After his bath, Ush stepped out looking totally refreshed. If you looked closely, you'd notice his hair and skin were dry, and more importantly, so were his clothes, with a faint scent of shower gel still lingering. He had clearly washed his clothes along with himself. How did they dry so fast? Simple. Ush had used his heat fruit ability to evaporate the moisture directly. Ah. That's better. He let out a satisfied sigh as he left the room. Now, all he wanted was a cold drink. On Guard Island, there'd been plenty of water, but no cold beverages. He hadn't had a single iced drink in 7 days, and it felt wrong. In the past, Ush might have avoided cold drinks for health reasons, but now that he had Nen, he didn't have to care about that sort of thing anymore. As he walked down a corridor, he overheard a familiar voice. At the time, I thought I had a chance to take Hisoka's badge. But in the end, he caught up to me, Gon was saying. Ush glanced over. Yep, Gon was talking. What happened after that? Kurapika asked. He already knew Gon was fine, it was obvious just by looking at him, but he was curious what had happened during Gon's attempt. Hisoka followed me, Gon said softly. He didn't attack. He just smiled and praised me. Ush nodded to himself. Yep, that's Hisoka, all right. Even without Greta's poison needle, Gon and Hisoka were always destined to cross paths. Not wanting to eavesdrop, Ush kept walking. I told him I didn't want the badge, Gon continued behind him. Even though he could have taken it back, he just smiled and said I earned it. I couldn't accept it. So I gave it back. Ush rolled his eyes slightly. You little softy. Still, he kept walking. Then Hisoka punched me. He said, when you're strong enough to return this punch, I'll give the badge back. And I hated myself for being too weak to even fight back. Gon's voice cracked. Hearing that, Ush picked up his pace. Nope. Not listening to this soap opera today. And with that, he left the hallway before Gon could start crying. Chapter 74. If he didn't walk faster, he might really snap. The more Ushi listened, the more he worried he'd end up rebelling against Gon. Sure, Gon didn't understand his own limitations yet and thought his strength was decent. But come on, even without Nen, how delusional did you have to be to think a 12-year-old with no complete combat training could match an adult fighter with actual experience? Did Gon think the entire world was made up of fools with talent, and he alone was a genius? Sigh. If that were true, then wouldn't Ush be looked down on, too? Shaking off the irritation, Ush headed to the dining area. He shoved Gon's sentimental rambling out of his mind and made a beeline for the drinks section. There, under the confused eyes of the staff, he grabbed a cold drink. Tons. In less than 10 seconds, Ush drained a 500 milliliters cold drink. Hiccup. A long, satisfying burp followed. Hello, everyone. President Netero will now conduct interviews. If you hear your number, please proceed to interview room 1 on the 2nd floor. Candidate number 188, please report to interview room 1. An interview? The other candidates looked confused. Ush, now called, headed directly to the 2nd floor and stood before the designated room. Knock. He tapped the door politely. Come in, Netero's voice called from inside. With a small nod to himself, Ush opened the door and stepped inside. The room was simple, and at the far end, Netero sat cross-legged, arms folded inside his sleeves, calm and unreadable beneath a hanging scroll marked with the kanji for heart. Have a seat, Netero said, gesturing in front of him. This is a short interview before the final test. I'd like to ask a few questions for reference. Ush sat down, giving a small nod. Please go ahead. First question, why do you want to become a hunter? Ush answered without hesitation. Honestly, I don't. But my Nen training is halfway complete, and there are things I don't understand. I need a good teacher. Netero jotted something down in a notebook and nodded. I see. Second question, among the remaining candidates, who do you think stands out the most? Kurapika, Ush answered instantly. Not Gon. Not Killua. Not Hisoka. Not even Jitaraker. It was Kurapika. That was because Ush had seen what Kurapika was capable of later in the timeline, when he became one of the Zodiacs. Oh? Interesting choice, Netero said, raising a brow slightly. And finally, out of the remaining 9 candidates, who would you least want to fight? Gon. This answer took Netero by surprise again. It wasn't because Gon was strong, but because he was annoying in a fight. He wouldn't give up, and worse, he wouldn't let others concede either. In a match where victory had to be won through a clear concession, Gon was the worst kind of opponent. All right. Thank you for your answers. You may go, Netero said, still curious about Ush's choices. As Ush left the interview room, the announcement came again, this time for candidate number 44, Hisoka. The rest of the interviews went quickly. Within half an hour, all were done, and Netero and the other examiners gathered to decide the final matchups. The results surprised even Mankey and Buara. This is the actual plan? Buara asked. Netero just grinned. He meant every word of it. Candidates, please begin preparing yourselves. We will arrive at the final test site in 3 days. The message played on loop 3 times across the airship. Hearing it clearly now, Ush sprawled across a sofa and stared at the ceiling. Well, 3 days of nothing. I guess I'll just keep working on my Nen control, he muttered. A thin aura layer flowed around him unconsciously, flickering with flashes of weapons, animals, and odd objects. None of them moved, his control wasn't quite there yet. There might be a game console on board. Should I play a few rounds? He shook his head. Forget it. This is still the hunter exam. Now's not the time to slack off. His gaze hardened slightly. Not until I'm at the level of a master-level Nen user. According to what he knew, the main distinction lay in 2 things, total manifested aura and potential aura capacity. Manifested aura affected attack power. Potential aura measured stamina and endurance. As long as Ush didn't die, he would never run out of potential aura. But, Chapter 75. Almost everything is fine, until it isn't. Ush was experiencing that now. His life energy wasn't lacking for the time being. But both manifest chi and potential chi, their upper limits, weren't determined by life energy alone. If they were, then everyone's life energy would be more or less the same, right? So why are there still power level distinctions? If life energy were the deciding factor, then once someone awakened Nen, everyone would hit the ceiling right away. Clearly, that's not the case. So it follows, what determines the upper limit of manifest chi and potential chi is the strength of one's mental will. In simpler terms, spiritual power. The meditation of Nen users is essentially a way to strengthen that spiritual power. One thing worth noting, spiritual power doesn't just increase quantity, it enhances quality too. And if you look at the Chimera at Arc, you can tell, most of the combatants there grew tired over time. That tells you something. If they were building sheer volume, instead of quality, you'd expect to see signs like them being able to stay awake for days, or even separating their Nen from their body like a ghost. But even someone like Netero, one of the 5 strongest Nen users in the world, couldn't do that. So what's the difference between increasing mental power and increasing spiritual will? It seems like the latter strengthens one's resolve. It makes you more decisive, resilient, less likely to waver under pressure. Which might also explain why so many top Nen users are kind of paranoid maniacs. If their will is too strong, maybe they get so set on their ideals that they become unhinged. So if Ush doesn't want to become a stubborn, obsessive lunatic, it's probably smarter to increase his mental power, not just spiritual will. That's all well and good, but here's the problem, Ush doesn't have a meditation technique for cultivating mental power. Where the hell is he supposed to find one? Does it even exist in this world? Has it already been overshadowed by spiritual will-based techniques? Or is it that the Nen system itself, with all its conditions and vows, works better with spiritual will than mental power? Very possible. Nen, after all, runs on emotion, conviction, and willpower. You need to believe in what you are doing to amplify your abilities. And to do that, maybe spiritual will is the stronger path. Ugh. Troublesome. Ush chugged his cold drink irritably. It didn't help much. Even the icy refreshment, usually so satisfying, couldn't shake his frustration. Time ticked by slowly. Ush lay motionless on the couch, sipping now and then through a straw, the only proof he was still conscious. Then, wait. He sat up abruptly, realization dawning. He had fallen into a mental trap. Why was he chasing after meditation techniques when he had his own ability, the miracle fruit? If he could create his own fruits, then he could create a fruit that increased his mental power. Or better yet, a fruit that could train his mental power. And the second one would be way more valuable, because it wouldn't just boost power temporarily. It would build real, lasting growth. Once his mental power improved, it wouldn't matter if that fruit disappeared. He'd still keep the gains. Yes. That was it. Excited, Ush downed the rest of his ice water and bolted from the dining area, heading straight back to his room. The sudden burst of energy confused the other candidates. Once inside, he grabbed a pen and paper and got to work designing a new miracle fruit. Step 1. Decide between training and direct enhancement. Ush picked training. If he set the fruit stair low, say, 3rd tier, he had a better chance of manifesting it again later. And if the fruit relied on absorbing life energy to function, then it would self-sustain, just like his previous miracle fruits. Over time, his mental power would increase. And as that improved, so would both his manifest and potential chi. And as those rose, he could eventually create more powerful fruits to further push his limits. Yes. This was the perfect loop. He'd cycle growth into more growth. Eventually, he could hit the master level Nen user benchmark. Maybe even surpass it. Ush grinned as his pen scratched across the paper, working fast. Soon, his new fruit was fully designed, the spiritual training fruit. It had a name, an ability description, and a detailed fruit design. Perfect? Now all that remained was to manifest it. He gathered 2,000 points of mental chi and activated his miracle fruit ability. But what he got was the Zoan type, snake fruit, python form. Damn it, Ush muttered, shoving it in his mouth anyway. No use wasting it. He chewed, swallowed, and without missing a beat, began charging up his next manifestation. This time, it was superhuman type, tetherline fruit. Ugh. Not even close. He shook his head, and got ready to try again.